Every year for summer holidays, me and my family go to my grandparents' house in a region in France called Bretagne, and they have the luck to live on a cliff right next to the beach, which is pretty neat. And for you to understand the situation I was in, I'll do a quick description of the place, and most importantly, how to access the beach. When we get out of the house, we need to cross a little road to get to an entrance between bushes. Then it's a clear but narrow path that you can take to just enjoy the view of the sea, or you can also go to a staircase built in the rock of the cliff. Then you'll just have to walk on medium-sized stones, and ta-da! You've arrived to the beach. The place itself is pretty big, but there's only a few ways to access it. By the staircase I described, or by another one at the other end of it. Also, the big thing to mention, as I grew older, I stopped building sandcastles and swimming with my family. I'm 18, and the older of 3 siblings that are way younger than me, so I was done playing childish games. And I had started to climb on the cliffs for fun. Not the steep ones, it was more or less the semi-hiking of partially collapsed cliffs. This will be relevant later. Last year, after having dinner, I headed out for a little walk on the beach. No one seemed interested in coming with me, so I went alone. No big deal, I did it every evening. After going down the staircase, I walk a little bit, and then sat down on a stone to smoke a joint and listen to some music. Not really smart, but hey, I'm a teen in a little village that I go to every summer, and as much as I love my family, it gets pretty boring from time to time. I'm enjoying my me time when I spot a guy from the corner of my eye, about 40 meters away from me. No big deal, it's a free access beach after all. But then he starts heading towards me. His head was shaved, and he had square-shaped glasses on, maybe around mid-20s to early 30s. He was pretty tan, like he worked outside, and the bald dude continued getting closer. I mean, I can't say anything, I don't own the beach. As he's approaching me, I hear over my music that he's trying to speak to me. I removed my headphones, and he said something along the lines of, "Hey, you look familiar. Have we met before?" No. He kept insisting that he saw me at the beach today. And sure, I said, "Yeah, well, maybe, but there are tons of people at the beach." I don't remember seeing everyone I saw. The way I responded clearly implies that I'm not interested in having this conversation with him, but he sits right next to me and he keeps talking, mostly about himself, and that he loves the beach, that the weather is nice, and that I'm nice with him. Here's when things got creepy. He says that it's rare to find nice girls, and that he's happy I'm not like the other girls. He then asks me about my name, where I live, and of course I don't say anything. He starts to lean in closer, which made me feel very uncomfortable, with a huge grin on his face. That's when it hit me. Remember when I said that there was only a few entrances to the beach? That guy was sitting right between me and the staircase. I was cornered, no one was there, and we were completely alone. And even though I'm quite athletic, I'm 4'9" and weigh 90 pounds, this guy is twice my size, and he clearly wants to continue our discussion. As I'm not responding, he starts to sound annoyed, clenching his fists, but still with that stupid grin glued to his face. He asked me if I really was a good girl, and why don't I talk to him. I'm bricking it at this point. I look to my left, and almost let out a sigh of relief. One of the cliffs I'm used to climbing is right next to us, and I know I could rush up in a matter of seconds, and I used to do it running. Run on a narrow path and get straight home. So I got up and said, "I don't want to talk to you anymore. Good evening." He looked startled for a moment, looking back to me in the staircase, which confirmed my suspicions. He thought he had blocked my only way of escape, since the other stairs were far away. To this day it still scares me that it was his first reaction. At this point I'm high, tired and terrified, but I start to walk confidently to the cliff at my high pace, and in the corner of my eye I can see that he is standing, looking in my direction. As soon as I'm close enough, I literally start to jump from rock to rock as fast as I can, scratching myself in the process. When I scramble to the top, I look down and he's looking at me, not smiling like before, but frowning, a look which tells me he's on the verge of committing a crime. I then sprinted to my grandparents' house, which lucky is really close, and explained everything to my mother the next day. I reported the guy to the police station, giving the best description that I could, since it is a small village, and they could apprehend him easily if he was a resident. So yeah, I made it out. What did this guy actually have planned? I'm glad I didn't have to stick around to discover what it was. When I was approximately 3 years old, I had 2 experiences that at the time I did not quite understand. The first time I thought nothing of it, even though it seemed to surprise my family. But as I'd gotten older, I had become increasingly interested in all things supernatural and anything related to it. My first experience is more memorable. Like many young kids, I would talk to someone while playing alone. My parents had passed it off as an imaginary friend and entertained the idea when I could talk about it. Whenever they would mention that my friend was imaginary, I would become upset and protest, saying the guy was real. For about 2 months, I would have a sort of routine that I would go through daily. Just a disclaimer, the explanation I'm about to write is both from memory and what my parents remember me telling them. My mum also decided to record me one day while playing with my friend, and also asked me to explain him in the video. All of what I'm about to explain was obviously not seen by my parents, because I believe it was something supernatural, and that only I could see him. So, I would sit on the couch staring out the front window of the house until an old orange pickup truck would pull into our driveway. A fat man with a dog would get out of the truck and come inside. The man's name was John, and the dog's name was Lucky Duck. We would go into our living room and play for a while, and then when he had to leave, I would walk to the door and say goodbye to him and his dog. My mum was curious, and so she asked me to describe my imaginary friend. I told her the man's name and that he was fat and could be kind of mean sometimes, but that he was usually nice when we played. I also told her about dog and that it was very mean and I was never allowed to pet it, but I was glad to see it anyway. This all happened at about the same time every day, as if it were on a schedule. After a few months, my mum noticed that I had not been playing with my imaginary friend anymore, and wondered why. That's when I told her that he had told me that he couldn't come over anymore, that was the end for me, and I'd never mentioned him again. Soon after that, my mum had been talking to my grandma on my dad's side, and she told her about my imaginary friend. My mum said my grandma had become pale and looked extremely surprised. My grandma then pointed out to my mum that the description matched my grandma's father exactly. The truck, its colour, the appearance, the attitude, and the most surprising part was that his name matched, and the dog's name and description matched his favourite dog he had. My grandma doesn't believe in supernatural things, but she even thinks that there was something that came to visit me. And no matter if it was a ghost or an angel, it was her father. I'd never met this man in my life, as he had died many years before I was born. The dog he had, when he came to me, had died even further in the past. This first experience had made my father a bit nervous of me once he had heard about it. My second experience happened around the same time as the first, but I do not remember this one as well. Most of the story comes from what my parents have told me. My dad was home alone with me while my mother was at work. I had been sitting at the sliding glass door that led to our backyard for a long time, so my dad checked in on me, wondering what I was doing. I nonchalantly told him that there had been a woman standing in our yard for a long time. This of course made him nervous that someone had been trespassing and was watching me, so he came over to check. He obviously did not see anyone standing out there, but went outside to verify in case. When he returned, I yelled at him because I was getting mad that he could not see her just standing there not moving. I told him that I even watched him walk right in front of her when he went out. Becoming scared for and of what I was saying, he took me away from the window and wouldn't let me leave him until my mum got home from work. She asked me to explain what I had seen, and I tried to tell her the way the lady looked. I told her that it looked like a lady in one of your pictures, and also an angel statue we had in our house. She of course wanted to know which picture I was talking about, so I got her wedding photo album out from our bookshelf and pointed to a picture of her grandmother who lives in Germany. Again, like the last experience, I had never seen my mother's grandmother because she had died a long time before I was born. I'd never seen this lady again, but my family has always seriously believed I had seen an angel. I haven't told anyone outside the family and friends about these experiences, so I would love to hear what other people think. I can't for sure explain either of them, but I do believe they were supernatural. I'm also not sure whether or not they were both the same type of thing, or if they were different. Since then I haven't had any other experiences, but it has left me with a belief in the supernatural. I am a 28-year-old American female. I have experienced many paranormal experiences in my life, starting at a very young age. I have grown to respect and trust my instincts, because they have proven true time and time again. Usually my internal voice will alarm whenever there is odd energies or things that aren't natural. However, recently, I had a completely different experience that has left me shaken. Back in June of 2018, I gave birth to my son. The pregnancy was pretty average. A rough first trimester, but nothing alarming. All of my well checks and ultrasounds went as expected, and the only concern was that he was going to be a large baby. I'm a small-framed female, so a large baby was concerning for birth. Anyway, my labor went well up until an hour after birth. To keep a long story somewhat short, my son and I both had severe complications. I ended up having a retained placenta and hemorrhaged severely on the delivery bed. It was a close call, but after a 2-hour D&C with no anesthetics that was performed in the room, and my husband still has nightmares about the amount of blood, I made it through. There was literally blood on the ceiling, floors, walls, and staff because the doctor was just pulling whatever she could out and throwing it on the ground in an attempt to remove all the broken pieces of placenta so that she could insert the balloon to stop the bleeding. Because of the amount of blood, the doctor actually slipped and fell on me with the utensils, causing an infection, which gave me severe convulsion episodes later. It was a nightmare. At the same time as this was happening, my son was aspirating in the crib next to me. I will cut to the chase with him and explain that after his aspirating several times, they found that my son had several birth defects that are very hard to detect during gestation. Everything he has is physical and not cognitive, and he faces everything with such strength. I couldn't be more proud of him. At the time though, all they knew was that he needed emergency surgery and were transporting him to the NICU. I was absolutely devastated. I just fought so hard for my life to find out that now my son was having to do the same. It is hard to explain to others how I felt in that moment. I will jump through details that aren't important to this story. I was able to convince my doctors to discharge me 22 hours after birth so that I could be with my son. The NICU has private rooms for each baby where the parents can stay in the room with them, and that is what I did for the entirety of his stay. At 2 days old, my son was waiting to be taken from the operating room for his first surgery. While staying with him, I ended up suffering from a spinal headache. For those of you fortunate enough to not have experienced this, let me tell you that it is awful. I couldn't do anything but lay flat on my back without being in severe, debilitating pain. I would never wish that on anyone. It ended up lasting for 3 weeks. The day I woke up with it gone was amazing. Here is where things became odd for me. During this time, I refused to leave my son. I was at the hospital with him all the time so that I could make sure I knew exactly what he needed. We knew it was going to be a very long road ahead of us, and I wanted to be as prepared as possible. I was not worried about my own health in any way. To be honest, going home wasn't helpful to me. I was so sick with the spinal headache and infection that any chance I could, I was laying down. Anyway, but at least at the hospital I was by my son. I went home a few times and it didn't last. I felt empty and anxious and I just couldn't do it. One day in particular, after the headache was less aggressive, I was feeling a bit more energetic and decided to return home for a few hours. I spent time with my animals and my husband, cleaned up the house, showered in my own shower and just rested. On the way back to the hospital, my husband and I stopped by the gas station. He went in to pay and I sat in the car. I was trying to send a text message when I started to become very aggravated, as I was not hitting any of the buttons correctly. I was typing gibberish, so in frustration I threw my phone. I went to stand up out the car to go grab a candy bar when everything went black. My knees buckled and I fell on the concrete sobbing. My vision was gone. I felt my husband grab me and ask what was happening, with panic in his voice. I could barely speak in between sobs, but I somehow managed to choke out, "I can't see." Luckily, there was an emergency room not 3 minutes down the road from where we were at, so he rushed me there. I felt him put me in a wheelchair and a nurse came to talk to me. I tried to speak with him and then I realized it was worse. I couldn't feel my tongue. I was trying to speak, but sounded like my face was just injected with Novocaine. At the time, it wasn't amusing, but looking back now it sounds hysterical. Anyway, after a while everything ceased, and I was feeling much better. The staff were concerned that it was either a severe panic attack, as I do have a history of severe anxiety and depression, or it could be a stroke. The doctor ordered a CAT scan. In the meantime, they decided to give me fluids and a new medication through the IV. Unfortunately, that was not a good decision. Just my luck. I apparently have an allergy to this medication, and I went into full dystonia. I lost it. I thought the walls were caving in. I felt caged. I had panic attacks because I heard that the radiology department was running behind and I was not willing to be away from my son any longer. I ripped out my IV and I was leaving. Despite my husband and the staff urging me to stay, I wasn't having it. The CT could wait. Clearly, with all I had been through, and already having severe anxiety, it was obvious that I threw myself into the worst panic attack I ever had. Boy, was I wrong. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, I had 3 more episodes. None of them were as severe, but I still had the numbness in my face, arms and legs, to the point I dropped things without knowing it, or would fall. Luckily, my vision only blurred, but never went fully away. I know it sounds ridiculous now, but at the time I justified it. I thought for sure my body was overloaded and panicking. For anyone who has ever experienced true panic attack, they underestimate that the symptoms mimic something more severe. I refused to handle anything in regards to me until my son was home. One night I was having a really hard time. I was in so much pain, but not like before. The pain was different. It was constant and throbbing, worse than any migraine or headache I have ever experienced. Unlike before, laying down made no difference and brought no relief. It wasn't a horrible pressure at the back of my skull / top of my neck anymore. It was my entire head. I was, for the first time in my life, considering banging my head against a wall. I felt a very deep panic at that point, and the pain would never stop. I was in agony, but was hiding it from everyone because I didn't want to leave my son. No one else could get him to eat what he needed to in order to gain weight and come home. They tried very hard, but he was adamant that he wanted his mum. And it was very hard on all of us, and made me feel an extreme guilt if I left. Despite me trying to hide my pain, my husband could tell something was off. He convinced me for the first time since my son was born to come for the night. I won't lie, it felt nice to lay in my own bed. I thought for sure being with my husband that I would feel comfortable enough to sleep. Instead, I had one of the worst nights of my life and learned to never doubt your instincts. I tried so hard to sleep, I really did, but every time I closed my eyes, that voice inside would scream for me to wake up. I would jolt awake sweating, my heart was racing, and I felt tears coming. I would calm myself down and lay back down, but it would just repeat. I had no control over my mind. It just kept repeating, "Do not sleep, or you will perish. You will not wake up. You will never see your children again. You need to get up." I was fully convinced it was the end. By 3 a.m. I still couldn't break this cycle. I messaged my mum and apologized for waking her, but explained what happened. She was very comforting and told me that I was panicking because this was my first night away from the baby and that my anxiety was getting to me. I wanted to believe her, but I never have felt this sense of impending doom feeding my anxiety. I thanked her and let her be. I finally resorted to waking up my husband. I didn't want to because he really needed rest, and he was finally sleeping somewhat sound since I was home. He has always struggled to sleep without me, and I had been gone for weeks. I needed him though. I was to the point of sobbing and shaking. I was terrified, and I told him what had been happening, and he said the same thing my mum did. I needed to calm down and relax. I don't blame either of them in the slightest bit. It was the most reasonable explanation, and I understood that, but I could feel something was wrong. Something did not want me sleeping. I eventually drifted off for about 2 hours around dawn, and was relieved when I woke up. As the day went on, I convinced myself that they were right, that I had just worked myself up. And that evening the baby came home. I was so excited that my family was together again. My mum stopped over to watch the kids so that my husband and I could run to the store for some essentials. While leaving, I had my 4th episode of impending doom, and the feeling hit immediately. I was not ignoring it twice, and had my husband take me to the hospital. I felt ridiculous explaining everything to the staff. I was in the same emergency room I went to before, and other than the doctor, all the staff were the same ones I had prior. I apologized profusely for leaving before. They were all very kind and understanding, and I will forever be thankful for how supportive they were instead of scolding me and making me feel worse. A huge part of me felt dumb for going in and wasting their time over panic attacks, but I couldn't shake the feeling what I had was getting worse. I felt such immense panic. It's hard to put into words. It was deep in my stomach, heavy and sickening. I finally had a CAT scan done, and the doctor came back with the results. I will never forget the look on his face. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, Darling, I'm so glad you came in. You really should have listened to your husband. You are very, very lucky. You aren't crazy. You are experiencing a CVST. You have a blood clot in your brain, sweetie. It's causing mini strokes, and I need to transfer you to the main campus immediately to be admitted to the stroke unit. This is very serious. I was in complete shock. I was completely convinced that it was not possible for me, a perfectly healthy 27-year-old female at the time, to have strokes. I know that it can be common after birth, but I had no prior symptoms or past history of such a thing. I will always wonder what was telling me so adamantly to get help. Was it me, my grandma, a spirit guide, or something else? Whoever it was straight to the point and very blunt. They made sure I knew the end was near. So to all of you, my advice is to never wait with your health, no matter the circumstances, and never ignore that gut feeling. Trust it, because I can guarantee you, it will be right. Back when I was a kid, early to mid-90s, our town was a bit smaller than it is now, meaning we sort of knew nearly every store or business inside it. We weren't a small town in the middle of nowhere though. It was a suburb of Baltimore and DC. I was around 9 when I remembered clear as day that my parents ordered me this colourful wooden bed from a local store that sat in the same shopping centre as our main 7-Eleven. I would ask when the bed would come, and sometimes my parents would say very soon, but other times they had no clue as to what I meant. As years went on, I would ask about it whenever we would drive by the shopping centre, and like years prior, the answers were always mixed. Sometimes they would say, "What bed?" and other times, "Yeah, we cancelled it when we got the daybed." During my junior year of high school, I was taking driving lessons in the same centre with my cousin. When I told him about this, he would joke about it just being some fluke. One day while waiting to get picked up, we decided to go in there. And I swear the same man I remember that sold us the bed was in there, not even aged. He greeted us, and I asked if they ever sold kids' beds. He said no, that they usually sell couches and the sort, and I told him about the bed, and he said he'd never seen such a thing. Fast forward a few years later, our high school friend goes shopping for a bed for her son. Where does she go? And what does she buy? That bed. The one I remembered buying but never getting. What's worse is she got it from the same store. I flip because it felt like my whole life was a lie. I decide to go back to that store, this time with her since I knew for a fact she bought the same bed and that the damn man is there. This time he did look older but not by much. Anyhow, I asked him why he told me a long time ago that they never sold kids' beds, when this girl just bought one. I thought my parents brought it for me as a kid 15 years ago. He proceeded to tell me that they have always sold kids' beds, and that the model she bought is one of their oldest selling. My cousin even remembers the guy saying that they never sold kids' beds, so I'm not alone on that. I still don't know what happened. I gave up after that. It was bizarre and freaked me out. I will swear to God that I remembered that bed, and I remember my parents getting it. That store is still there, with its same old sign, and I imagine, the same old man. Never ignore that sudden feeling you get when you need to get out of some place. Never, ever. It saved my life. I was at a party that doubled as a sending-off party for me before I deployed, and there was an after-party planned in which I was going to DJ along with some of my other friends. I did a short set at the party, then dropped Simi. Yeah, I know, I don't need a lecture, and ran around having fun with all my friends and my former production company. 2 hours later, I suddenly become absolutely dead sober, and had that horrible feeling that we needed to leave, and we needed to do it right that second. I immediately rounded up the friends I had and took everyone home and fell straight asleep. The next morning I was woken by a phone call. It was a friend telling me that at the after party, our friends had been ended by a psycho going through the house with a shotgun. That's where I would have been if I hadn't have got that feeling and went home immediately. This, for those of you who don't know, is the Capitol Hill Massacre, committed by 28-year-old Kyle Aaron Huff. He entered the rave and opened fire, finishing 6 off and wounding 2, and then turned on himself as he was being confronted by the police on the porch. It was horrifying. About the time I was 17 or so, a few friends and I were out at the beach making dry ice bombs in the middle of the night. This was probably around midnight or so, as we were quite delinquent back then. There were about 5 or 6 of us, and we were just chilling, having a good time, trying to make potholes in the ground with dry ice bombs in the sand. It was quite a foggy night, which isn't too unusual considering I live in Oregon on the northwest coast, and it rains here 300 days out of the year. After 30 minutes or so of being rambunctious teenagers, we decided to walk down the beach a bit. After about 15 minutes of walking, we hear a strange scratching grinding sound and stop and listen. Sooner than 20 seconds later, a tall figure emerges out of the fog adjacent to the ocean but between us and the ocean. This guy had to be at least 8 foot tall, and it was dragging a chain. Not your average chain, but a massive chain that looked like it had been used for an anchor or something. The rings were probably at least 8 to 12 inches apiece, and it looked like they had to be at least an inch in diameter too. Now this chain wasn't short by any means. It was probably 40 to 50 feet long, and this dude was just dragging it in the sand behind him in the middle of the night. We all sat there silently, and I got the biggest shiver down my spine, and all my hair stood up on end, and my breath seemed to escape me. We gathered watching the figure cross our path and make its way up the beach, and the chains slowly faded out of sight. Well, that was creepy as hell, I thought. We then continued back down the beach to a shipwreck called the Peter Iredale, which is all about but eroded now, and took to the cool sea spray to enjoy the ominous whooshing of the serene ocean waves. We toss a few dry ice bombs into the water and head back to our car, where we parked probably half a mile up the shore. As we're walking, we hear the noise again. My heart thumps, and I get cold sweats. It was that thing, trudging the goddamn chain up the beach. It had to have been the exact same place where we saw it the first time. There were no drag marks in front of him, no footsteps, no indication that anyone had laid foot on the ground in front of him in the path that had previously been walked. The sand was dry. It wasn't washed over by waves or anything of the sort. We watched it for a moment out of curiosity as to what the actual hell was going on. We stood there dumbfounded, watching the figure trudge through the sand with this unfathomably massive chain dragging behind it. It stopped dragging the Satan chain and stared directly at us, piercing our soul and the essence of our being. We just stood there, jaw dropped, staring back at this shadowy figure. It begins to slowly march towards us, and we booked it through the sand. I've never run so fast in my life. We all pile into the car, bro turns the engine on, and we floor it out of there, easily hitting 80 miles an hour on the straight stretch of access road. We absolutely hauled serious ass out there. The entire time, I was staring out the back window of the car, for some reason expecting it to Terminator after us and catch up. Thankfully it didn't, and I never saw the shadowy figure again. It was the strangest, most heart-wrenching, terrifying thing I've ever seen. Neither of us were on any kind of drugs. We were all straight-edge kids, clean as a whistle, and shadow figures in chains scaring kids? Shame on them. A week or so later, a friend of ours who wasn't there that night told me that people used to practice black magic in the dunes there, and that there were artifacts of demonology and inverted crosses scattered about. I said his accusations were nonsense. Turns out it was all true. I went to the mum and asked her about it, and she said she had heard similar stories. So naturally we looked into it a bit, and then went out to search for said black magic, devil-worshipping sites. We were able to find some sort of inverted crosses, which were made of some sort of metal that was all but rusted over, and concrete blocks, probably a cubic meter in size in a few different places. Holes bored through them, and metal rings inserted through them, as if to be an anchor point. I put two and two together, and theorized that the chain was the one point connecting to these blocks in the dunes. For Lord knows what purpose, I assumed that that creature was a black magic / demonic summon, and I will never set foot on those cursed dunes again. Also, it turns out this is in the Oregon Ghost Stories book, which is chilling to have witnessed firsthand. It's certainly spooky stuff. This happened 3 times, with 3 different people. I grew up in a 2-story house in the Philippines. Upstairs there was a huge playroom and 4 bedrooms. When I was around 11 years old, me and my babysitter were hanging out in the playroom. She went to the bathroom, and I got bored, so I went downstairs to check out the fridge. I heard her come out the bathroom, and she started screaming my name. After the 3rd time, she stopped. I thought she figured out that I was downstairs, and after a few minutes, I saw her coming down the stairs. As she looked at me, she froze and just stared at me. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she saw me in the playroom before she went downstairs. She was really freaked out about it. And I don't know, I used to not believe in these things, so I just laughed at her. The 2nd time it happened, I was probably 16. I was hanging out in my brother's room because it's the room with the fastest internet. And then I heard my 6-year-old brother, as I have 2 brothers, calling me and looking around for me. I didn't answer back and just waited for him to find me. I saw him go into my room, and then he got quiet. I thought he was looking for something and just found it. As he was walking out my room, he saw me in my brother's room, and he just froze and stared like my babysitter. I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "Why are there 2 of you?" And that's when I freaked out and ran to my mum's room. She laughed at us, but I remember sleeping in her room that night. The last time it happened was when I was 20. My parents were on vacation with my youngest brother, so me and my other sibling had to stay at my grandparents' house at night. The first night they were away, me and my sister decided to go home and get more clothes. We were both in my room because she likes to borrow some of my clothes, and I told her that I'm going to take a shower. That's when she left and went to her room to pack more clothes. I went to the bathroom and started brushing my teeth. As I was about to get into the shower, my sister walked into the bathroom, and she looked at me so weirdly and her face turned pale. So I asked her what was wrong. She said she went back into my room and she was talking to me, but then she had to pee, so she went to the bathroom and found me here. We both looked at each other, grabbed our stuff, and left. I still don't know why or what it is, but it still creeps me out when I think about it. When I was very young, My parents and I were on vacation at our beach house, and I had a dream of my mother's friend. Her name was Jill, and she told me to tell my mother that she was finally happy. So the next morning during breakfast, I told my mum what this woman, who I never met, told me, and my mum immediately shot up and dialed a phone number on her phone. She later told me that her friend Jill was in hospital, and that the person on her phone had told her that Jill had passed away in the night I had a dream. Also, in my freshman year of college, I had a dream about my dad getting into a car accident, and that morning I called my mum to make sure everything was okay. She said everything was fine and that I had nothing to worry about. Later that day, she called me and told me that my dad had gotten into a car accident. Nothing major, but the car was a bit ruined, and she was floored by what I had seen in my dream. This happened a few months ago, but it still freaks me out. One night, me, my parents, and my siblings were in the bathroom brushing our teeth, getting ready to go to bed, when our dog all of a sudden just laid by the stairs. Suddenly though, I guess she heard something move or something, because she got up all of a sudden and walked over to my little sister's room, and she just froze. Mind you, there was nothing in that room besides the furniture that she was already familiar with. The door was wide open, and it was pitch black in the room, but my dog freaked out and began barking like crazy, showing her teeth and everything. Her fur stood upright, and she was slowly backing away from the room, not once losing sight of whatever she was watching. My family and I just kind of turned on each other thinking, what? But my dad is a real skeptic when it comes to these things, so he calls back the dog, went into the room and turned the light on. Nothing, of course. Needless to say, my sister was pretty hesitant to sleep there, but my dad told her to quit the crap, so she did. Our dog, who normally always sleeps at her bedside, stayed safely at the door. So then we kind of forgot about the incident. It didn't happen again, and my dog seemed to have gotten over it as well. A few days passed, and my younger siblings were asleep while me and my parents were watching some TV downstairs. All of a sudden, my sister comes racing downstairs crying and is absolutely terrified because someone was knocking on her bed. Now, me and my mum were a little freaked out, especially when she remembered the incident with our dog. But we didn't want to make it worse, so we told her it was probably nothing, and she eventually went back to bed, only after my mum tucked her in. A couple of days passed again. This time we were all ready in bed. My sister was asleep, and I think my parents were too. But I could hear my brother moving around in his room and shutting down his computer, so I knew he was awake. I lay on my stomach, faced away from the door, just scrolling on my phone, when all of a sudden I feel someone push at the end of my bed, causing it to kind of shake. It was so real the way my bed moved, that at first I was 100% sure it was my brother trying to freak me out. So I just said, "Cut it out, Stephen," and I kept scrolling. I didn't even look behind me, and it happened again. I repeated myself, this time more frustrated. Then it happened a third time. This time I spun around, fully prepared to yell at Stephen, but there was nobody. I literally just froze. I grabbed my covers tighter, and my heart was racing in my chest. I was contemplating what to do. Do I call my brother? Do I just jump to the door and run? I was picturing this whole movie scenario where I was going to be dragged down the stairs, so I was very frightened to move. But then it got even freakier. As I'm laying there contemplating what to do, someone knocks on the bottom of my mattress. It happened 3 times, and it was strong enough to actually move it. I think I finally snapped at that moment. When I tell you I sprinted, I mean put me in the Olympics sprinted. I ran out of my room, yelled for my brother, and woke up everyone, and just freaked the hell out. My dad inspected the room for me, like I was 6 again, and I eventually slept in my brother's room on the spare mattress. I still don't know what the hell could have done that, but I'm not hoping to find out. It all started when my wife and I first visited her mother's new home. Her mother had remarried and lived in a decent-sized house out in Palm Desert. We would visit them when I had time off from work. I had taken a shower in the guest bathroom, and when I got out amongst the fogged-over mirror, there were 2 children's handprints. At first I thought it was a print from her 3-year-old sister Emily, and when I was done, we brought her in to see if she had done it. The prints were at least twice as big as hers, looking like they'd belonged to a kid of around 8. My father-in-law, after this incident, tells us that a little boy haunts the house as a joke. He says when his own sons were young, he saw a kid run in the kitchen while watching TV. Thinking it was his son, he got up and walked towards where the boy ran. When he opened his son's room, they were both asleep. Any kid can pretend to be asleep, which he didn't think much of. The next few times we come, Emily has started to talk about her imaginary friend, and we ask who it is, and she says the word ghost, which is something we've never talked about around her. We ask her where is the ghost, and she goes where her room is and points to the middle of the floor and proceeds to lay down like she's dead. We laugh nervously now, thinking there's an actual ghost there that's harmless. But it gets worse. Around February, I had to go away for work 2 to 3 weeks. My wife stayed over at her mum's house during my absence with our 2-month-old son David. She tells me that one night at 4 AM she's feeding David, and she starts to drift off to sleep. All of a sudden, the door in the bathroom starts creaking open, and she sees the arms of a little kid following it. The door closes, and she hears footsteps run and slam into another door. This can't be her Emily, because she's asleep with her mum. Now, it's June, and we come to pick up her sister for 2 weeks, and that night, as we're asleep, my wife had a very realistic dream. In her dream, we had gotten into a fight, and when I left, she was in a tub of water holding something down, like a child drowning. She says she prayed to the Archangel Michael for protection, but before it ended, she heard a very dark voice whisper in her ear, "You're doing great." 2 weeks later, we come back to drop off Emily, and she has a dream that night of a little kid whispering in her ear and laughing. Her mum then tells us a month before she was sleeping and had heard the same thing, except the child says, "Billy, he's coming." Then she hears heavy footsteps down the hall and feels her legs go numb, followed by a heavy hit in her chest that blacks her out. I'm not sure what's going on in that house. I'm honestly scared for them and my child when I'm going over there. If anyone knows how I can ward this off, it would be greatly appreciated. My mother was a teenager and had a dream where my Uncle Doug was banging on some large doors while laying down. He was trying to yell something but was injured badly. My mother says what woke her was the pounding noise on the door. She wakes up and runs to my grandparents' room crying. "Doug's in trouble, he's hurt." She tries to explain her dream and they comfort her back to bed. Not long later, my mother wakes up again, but this time the knocks are real. My grandmother opens the doors to 2 policemen. They tell my family that Doug had been stabbed in the parking lot in a local bar and was in hospital. Apparently my Uncle Doug had some words with 4 of the other guys in the bar about his girlfriend. They went to leave and the 4 guys jumped him in the back of the bar. He yelled for his girlfriend to drive off and get help, so she did. But after the assault, he was found by one of the employees at the back of the bar, knocking with his little amount of strength on his stomach. They narrowly missed the main artery too. He still has visible scars that he's shown me. Take what you will from the story, but it creeps me out a lot. This happened a long time ago, back when I was dating my boyfriend Tim. I decided to visit him. We lived in separate areas at the time, and we had a good time. And after staying with him for a few, he brought up the idea of going to Land's End. Tim mentioned how it used to be a swimming pool next to the ocean, and that his mum used to go there when she was little. It had since burnt down, but had a nice view and an even greater view of the sunset. We had planned on going the next day, but Tim woke up late, so we went the day after. After maybe 20 or so bus rides later, we arrived. At the top, there was a path leading downwards. It stopped on flat ground with a path leading to the right and another path continuing down. The path on the right went on for a little bit before it stopped at the mouth of a tunnel. Inside the tunnel was a path that led to the other side. While inside the tunnel, you could see something dripping and ocean waves. The path on the other side was long enough to fit maybe 4 or 5 people before it suddenly ended with a gap, disconnecting it from the continuing path on the other side. The gap was large enough that if you tried jumping to the other side, you'd probably fall or have a small chance of making it. On the other side, there was a wall on the right with rubble around it. Beneath us was a long trip down into the ocean. The downwards path continued before stopping on flat ground. On the left, there were broken walls, some curving, some straight, with most being small and flat enough to walk on. Others were higher and took squarish shapes. These places were filled with shallow water. Tim and I first decided to stop at the higher area and look around. We went through the tunnel, enjoyed the ocean view before moving to the lower area to explore. We both walked around the area and explored some more, walking on some of the paths to kill more time. As night approached, we headed back to higher area, as Tim mentioned the view would be better, and he was right. We were joined by a group of people, and we all watched the sun set in the sky. Tim and I decided to stay later to watch the moon, something I enjoy. As we stood watching the moon, more and more left before we were the only people left. As it got later, we witnessed a sight. The moon was moving, not in the slow crawl it usually does, but more like it was taking a light jog across the sky. We both thought it odd and strange, so we decided to see if we could see it on the platform of the other side of the cave, so we headed in. We were using our phones to help lighten the area as we walked. I had noticed that the sounds heard from earlier were gone, and were instead replaced with silence. We came to a stop hearing a growling noise. We looked around with our phones, but couldn't find the source of the noise. It wasn't like a stomach growling, but more along the lines of an animal. We both ran out of there and hightailed it back out to the walkway entrance. When we got back to the entrance, Tim mentioned the moon. Turning towards it, I looked at it in shock. Instead of being in a spot along with its jogging path, it was back to where it was before it started jogging. It was as if the moon had been reset. I have experienced ghosts pretty much my entire life. Let's start from the beginning. From the first day we moved in, my husband went to work, and I stayed home to unpack. We have a guest room right next to our room. Within an hour, my cat started growling at the room, and my dog was growling and barking. I grabbed a pair of scissors and threw the door open, expecting to see someone in there, but it was empty. My mum always said, when things like that happen, I need to say, in the name of Jesus Christ, you are not welcome here and you need to leave. That was the first time I ever said that. Ghosts haven't been a big problem for me growing up, so I could ignore most of it. But we just moved in, so I didn't want that to happen at all. I'm guessing that made things worse. I have an intense fear of windows at night. I don't know why, but I always have. So I had to buy curtains for our front door, back door, and kitchen window and rooms. The first incident happened at night. I was checking Facebook and looked up for a moment. It looked like someone was standing outside my house. I went back to Twitter, deciding it was probably a tree. When I was ready to go to bed, I sat up and saw a black shadow at the foot of my bed that slowly disappeared. After that, it was normal creaks and footsteps and things vanishing. I need to mention that for a few months, our cat had refused to sleep in our room at night. She will always sleep in the guest room, as it is her own bedroom. A week ago, my friend came over and brought her dog. She had her dog on her lap, and almost instantly her dog looked at the corner of my living room and started growling. Since then, I have been super uncomfortable. That same night, I put my smartphone on the end of the table. My side of the bed is right next to the bedroom door, and I caught a glimpse of what looked like the bottom of a white dress passing by. I jumped and slept under the covers that night. I call my grandma weekly since my mum died in December. While I was on the phone with her talking about my mum, I saw what looked like a shadow figure pass by our guest bedroom, which used to be hers. The animals stayed well away that day. The weirdest one that happened to me a while ago. I'm a night owl, so I'm always up until morning. I was watching TV, just normal reruns, and I was laying down on the couch which sat below our window until we rearranged it. I sat up and instantly felt dread and panic and fear. I thought I was in danger. I jumped off the couch and turned around. I had sat up and was right in front of an open space in the curtains, where anyone could look inside the house. As I said, I have an irrational fear of windows at night. No one could explain why that scared me so much, because I had no idea until I turned around. That brings us to today's incident. In between has been small stuff, as I said before. What happened was when I fed my cat dinner, she jumped off the desk where she eats. She looked at the bedroom and jumped as if something was terrifying her. She kept watching the bedroom and carefully walked under our entertainment center, over to the bedroom, and I tried to blame our fan, but she's never been afraid of it before. I followed her with my camera, switching between my bedroom door and hers, and she still carefully walked into the room and is still under my bed. My dog is acting like things are normal, but she's been with me for 8 years, so perhaps she's just used to it. This happened to me just last month. I'm currently dog sitting for my best friend and staying at her house while doing so. Some context. I watch this dog every weekend for half of the year, and I'm over at her house all the time when my friend comes home. The dog is female, and she's very unfriendly to anyone she doesn't know. She'll literally bite people that she doesn't know very well, even if they've met a few times. Even with her owner and myself, she's often very standoffish and will bite if she's in a mood. She's also not big into cuddling, especially at night and in bed. The dog is like a cat. You have to do things on her terms, or risk being snapped at. With that being said, she would not leave me alone last night. Around 3 AM, I woke up to her insistently licking my face and trying to be close to me. I'd shove her away, and she'd just crawl back up to me and wake me up again. When I buried my face to keep from getting licked, she just dug into the covers to get close to me. She'd eventually leave me alone for a short while, after practically crawling on my head to sit as high on the pillow as possible and pulling my hair by doing so. After several bouts of being uncharacteristically woken up like this, I thought that maybe she just really needed to use the bathroom. I reluctantly took her out and went back to bed. Not long later, she woke me up doing it again, but this time whining when I'd shut her out by hiding under the blankets, thinking that maybe the heater was on or that I was scaring her. I turned it off, and with the heater no longer making noise, that's when I heard it first. It was a click-click sound of a dog walking around on the hardwood floor. It's a distinct sound and one that I'm very familiar with. The thing is, the dog was in bed. Thinking I was just hearing things with the sound adjusting in the room, I ignored it and laid down to fall back to sleep. Once again, the dog kept licking me, whining and crawling all over my head. I was absolutely baffled, as to this point, I had been dog-sitting regularly for over 2 years and had never seen her act like this. Normally, if an animal or person comes nearby, she'll go into protective growl mode. This was something else entirely. I sat up, looked at her, trying to figure out what was wrong, and that's when I heard it a second time, distinctly. Not only did I hear it, the dog heard it too. She clearly responded to the sound, whined, then nuzzled closer to me. I looked around the bed, but nothing was there. Realizing that it was probably just another glitch and not an animal that had somehow gotten in, I decided to return to bed. This dog, that usually never lets anyone cuddle her for more than 5 minutes, let me sleep because I pulled her into a hug and stayed like that. I was absolutely amazed to wake up hours later to her still under my arm. Maybe we're both hearing a parallel version of her walking around, and that spooked her out. Normally, she goes into instant bark or growl mode, often frantically running up to the windows growling when she hears a raccoon or another animal outside. Whatever the case, I think what we heard in the room wasn't normal. Her reaction is testament enough for me. This all started when I was about 12. My parents had just gotten divorced, and I was in a pretty bad place. I still had imaginary friends at that age, but I imagine it's because I didn't really have many real friends. Anyway, I remember one friend in particular whose name was Zach. Now, I met Zach when I was about 8, so you can imagine we'd been friends for quite a while. Since I had grown since I met Zach, I was starting to realize that something wasn't quite right about him. When I first met him, I saw he had a rope necklace around his neck. I didn't realize at my young age that it was a noose. The only reason I know it's a noose now is because I had met him by a tree as a child, where there is a rather large rope burn in one of the branches. Anyway, I started to realize that Zach wasn't the same as he had been when I first met him. He grew older like I did, which none of my other imaginary friends had done, and he was starting to act differently. Kind of like most teenagers do, except he'd make strange noises and try to tell me who to trust and be friends with. When I didn't listen to him, he'd get angry. Now that I've grown up, I realize Zach isn't human. But little 12-year-old me didn't know that. Little me thought that maybe he was just angry. And he was. One night I was staying over at my friend's house. We had been staying up all night and watched scary movies that neither of us should have been watching. After the movies, my friend wanted to go to sleep, and I was pretty tired, so we did. That was a bad idea. At around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of someone opening the bathroom door. At first, I thought it was her dad getting home to check on us, as he worked the night shift and usually arrived at around 3 a.m. But I was wrong. It was Zach. I saw him right there in front of me, solid. I remember he had really dark hair and green eyes, and so many freckles. I wasn't scared, but I was confused. I only ever saw Zach by the tree where we met. I don't remember anything after seeing him at first. All I remember is my friend's mum yelling at me to come inside from the pouring rain. I was soaked and scared, and I couldn't remember why I was outside or how I got there. I just remember telling her that Zach wanted to play with me. I didn't see much of Zach after that. Maybe it's because I had told him to go away and that he had got me in trouble. Well, I didn't see him until recently. I'm 23 now and a caregiver for elderly and special needs patients. Needless to say, I'm well past the age when I should have an imaginary friend. The other night, I was caring for a client who lives in a pretty secluded area, which normally doesn't bother me, except it was getting dark fast, and I'm not a fan of the dark. I hate driving in it and being stuck in it. I was making her dinner as we were talking about her favorite show, America's Got Talent. She stopped in the middle of speaking and looked at me and said, "I have to ask you if you don't mind, who is your handsome friend?" I wasn't sure who she was talking about, but I should note that this woman is sharp. She's got her wits about her and is smart. I turned and asked her what she was talking about, and she said, "The young man who came with you. Dark hair, pretty eyes. Says his name is Zach." I couldn't believe it. I thought Zach wasn't real. I was sure he wasn't. I didn't say anything to her and just fed her before leaving. Today I was working with a special needs client who is nonverbal. He never says a thing. I took him out for ice cream and got him a bowl of chocolate and myself mint chocolate chip. I asked him if he liked his ice cream, only expecting a nod. I got more than I bargained for. He looked at me and smiled and said, "You know that chocolate is my favorite, Cassie." My nickname is Cassie, but none of my clients know that. If they call me by my legal name, it's Sam, but this client has never called me anything because he can't talk. I think it's very clear that Zach is back in my life, and he's not going anywhere. But I have to wonder if Zach is a ghost or something much darker. Around 8 years ago, I was on vacation with my parents and my cousin. My sister couldn't come, as she had just started her first job, so she stayed home by herself. When we were children, both my sister and I used to be really close, mainly because we shared a room for the first 7 to 9 years. We used to have our code, with taps, for asking things like, "Are you asleep? Are they?" and stuff like that. She's also always doing something or looking for something to do, always being the first up. So when she was up and wanted me to wake up, she would place her face as close to mine as possible and stare at me. I don't know for how long she would stay like that for, but I can clearly remember multiple times waking to her doing this. I, of course, would shout or at least panic until realizing it was her. I guess it was fun for her, and I have to admit, I also did it a few times. So now we are on our trip, and it's been at least 10 to 12 years since the last time my sister pulled this prank on me. My sister and I are not as close as we used to be. We have constantly grown apart a little, but we still love each other. It was the last night in our trip before heading back to our city, and we just had to find this nice hotel close to the pyramids in Palenque, which meant no cell phone service. We were sharing a room, my mum and dad in the first bed and my cousin and I in the other one. At some point around 4 a.m, I woke up to feel the same old sensation of someone staring at me, so I opened my eyes and can clearly see a face. My immediate reaction was to shout, waking up my mother. I have to say that this sensation by itself is really scary, but years of experience with my sister waking me up like this took the threat away. So despite of my shouting, I wasn't scared. I was just too familiar. My mum turned on the light and asked me what happened. I told her that I was pretty sure my sister had just woken me up. I know it didn't make any sense, but I felt it was her, although I can't say I saw her face. I just saw a face and it disappeared. Immediately. My mum is really superstitious, so she just couldn't sleep after that, because she felt something was really odd, and I couldn't sleep thinking it was my sister. Later that day in the morning, we noticed we all had a lot of missed calls. My sister was involved in a really bad car accident. Luckily, she only had minor injuries, and to this day, I don't know what to make out of this experience. My brain tells me it was just a coincidence, but on the other hand, it's the only way I would have thought of my sister sleeping. It was just so real in between both of us. As an extra, on our previous visit to Palenque, my parents, my sister and I at the ruins, we heard drums. My parents said that it was raining, and that we were playing with the ponds, and that at some point the drums started playing. Out of curiosity, we followed the sound, getting us deeper into the jungle. I can't remember why we stopped, but when we finally made it to the exit and asked the security guard about the music, he said, "So you heard the drums as well?" He then proceeds to tell us that a lot of people have heard them at different times, and they don't know the source of it. When I was 7 or 8, my family went to the beach and rented a hotel room. We had the kind of rooms that you rent out both and they connect through a door. There's one door to leave the room, and there is the door in between that connects the rooms individually. In the room connecting to ours, there was an army family, military father, some kids and a wife. My older sister was supposed to be watching me, as we were down at the jacuzzi during the evening, as we're just playing and hanging out and having a good time. I didn't get out much, was naive, and a little kid, and to give a little description, we're both white-skinned, blue-eyed blondes. Then, this person sits in the jacuzzi with us. She starts conversing with us and is just making herself very comfortable. I was very naive as a kid, and eventually we started talking books, and she's talking about her kids, who we haven't seen yet. We are having a really good conversation. I felt like it was very in-depth, and my sister decides she wants to go back to the room. But I don't. I wanted to stay and talk with this lady, so my sister goes back to the room, and now it's just 7-year-old me and some 40-year-old woman. It should have set off some creepy alarm bells, but it did not. She just starts talking about going and walking on the beach. It's about 10 p.m, and she wants to go on the walk and get shells. I thought it was a great idea. I'd get to walk on the beach at night. I felt so free and like a big kid. I didn't need my sister or anything. So I run back to the room to tell my grandparents that I'm walking on the beach with Sue, or whatever her name was. I remember my grandmother reading her book, barely listening to what I said, and she just shook me off. It's important to know I didn't live with my parents. So I start walking down the corridor that was really dark and dim, as it was quite cheap. I'm going through the stairwell like something out of a movie. Too bad I'd never seen this movie. As I'm walking through it, the woman is at the bottom telling me to hurry up. While walking through the stairs, Army Dad comes running down and asks where I'm going. He told me, "Your mum is calling you, it's really important, we gotta go," and basically grabbed me by the wrist, softly, and led me back to our room. He knocked on our door and explained what had happened. I never thought much about it until a year ago, when it came back to me. This woman was leading me away to the beach alone at night, and this army guy got a terrible feeling in his gut, so he intervened. When he said my mum was looking for me, and I don't live with my mum, it set off some alarm bells in my head. That's when I realized something was up, so I didn't resist going back to my family. As a kid, I knew since he was saying my mum wanted me, it was important. I just knew something was up because I don't live with her. I'm now 20 years old, and I truly believe that this woman was trying to lure me away to do God knows what. And this army dude had a bad feeling and saved my life. Thinking back, I get such a bad feeling all throughout my body. I now know that I wouldn't have made it back from that beach trip. Thank you, army dude. Your gut feeling and having a watchful eye saved something terrible from happening to me. That woman was creepy. We never even saw her kids. When I was younger, I used to go round my nana's house to watch TV after school. She had Sky TV, and we did not. So I'd always want to get my fill of cartoons. I'd always ring her in the morning and ask if it was okay. Now I can't say for definite if I rang her on this morning. I feel like I would have done, but I can't be certain. So I go round and knock and nobody comes to the door. I try to open it and it was unlocked, which is unusual in itself because my nana's house had been broken into not too long before, and she was pretty good at ensuring its security. So I get inside and call my mum to tell her that I'm at nana's but that no one's home. She says she'll send my sister, as she must have been 17 at the time. My nana only lives 2 streets away from my mum, so my sister got there pretty fast. I don't know how much time passes, but at some point there's a knock on the door. My sister, being a bit of a wimp, she sent me. Now what's really strange is how you get to my nana's back door. She lives in a terraced house, but is one of those streets where every 10 or so houses there's a break for a little alley that leads into people's back gardens. To get to the back door you have to walk past the front door, go down this alleyway, through the garden and up the back door. Also, the conversation went like this. "Does your nana still live there?" "Yeah, I'm her grandson." "Oh, I was looking for your nana." Now the way he spoke was kind of airy and confused. He didn't explain who he was, why he wanted my nana or anything, and I don't remember how we ended the brief conversation. I just remember turning to my sister, who was cowering in the hallway, and her telling me he looked exactly like my granddad. I can see it all clearly, and he was his absolute double. Now the disappointing part. I can't remember anything else. I don't know where my nana was. I don't know why her door was unlocked. I know my sister said at the time to not tell my mum because she thought it might upset her. But looking back, it was all just so weird, because my grandpa had passed years before. When I was 18, my grandfather was having heart problems. I would wake up every morning and go to his house to see him. I would just talk to him, help him around the house and watch TV with him. He has been really lonely since my grandmother passed 3 months ago. I'll never forget this moment. It was June 7th. I arrive at his house, and my grandfather has the biggest smile on his face. I was so happy to see him smiling. He looks at me and says, "Guess what? I'm gonna go see my wife in 2 days." At the moment, I thought my grandpa had lost it. Believe it or not, my grandfather passed 2 days later in his sleep. The thought of it is scary, creepy, and disturbing. It was like he knew he was going to pass in 2 days. On a side note, the last 2 days he was alive, he was smiling and peaceful. I can't explain it. It felt like he knew something we don't know. When I was younger, I lived in this house in the middle of nowhere. It was very close to a cemetery. When we first moved in, I was 4, and we later moved out when I was 6. We ended up moving back in the same house when I was 8. I had 2 imaginary friends. They were the ages of 12. Their names were Ashley and Alyssa. I remember them so clearly. I even remember them helping me clean my room and keeping me company when I was alone. I thought it was odd how my parents could never see them, but they would laugh at me when I brought them up. I never counted them as imaginary. I did have an actual imaginary friend, who I called Sarah, but I never saw her and I knew I created her, so I knew the difference between imaginary and non-imaginary. I would always have dreams of Ashley and Alyssa basically every night, and there was one dream in particular that I remember very clearly. I had this dream a couple of nights before my family and I moved out. It was also the last dream I had with them both. What was so weird about the dream was that the room was identical to the one I had when I moved back into the house. I had a different style bed. I had carpets this time, and my room was blue, not pink. In the dream, Ashley, Alyssa and I were on the bed. We were just talking. Then out of nowhere, they started laughing and pointed at the ground by my door. I looked at where they were pointing, and there were hundreds and hundreds of these small devils. They were the ones that you wind up. They all had odd-shaped keys in the back of them that you inserted and twisted for them to move. In my dream, I got up out of curiosity to see what they were. They started chasing me through my home, and I remember I woke up running, still being able to see them behind me. They disappeared once my dad ran into me, asking me what was wrong. As years passed, I forgot about the dream, and once I moved out, I never had a dream of Ashley and Alyssa and haven't seen them since. We ended up moving back in about 2 years later. I was older now, and I changed my room and the furniture I had in it, exactly like in the dream. I never really had anything creepy happen in the house, but when my family and I moved back in, odd things would happen. Lights would flicker, only in my room. Things would fall off shelves, pictures on my wall would just fall off my wall, and I would hear knocking coming from one of my closets. My television would shut off, and I would see things in the corner of my eyes. One day, I was cleaning my room. I noticed that by my closet, the one I would hear knocking in, there was a piece of wood on the frame popping out. I went on the ground and removed it, and I noticed that there was some kind of small hole just big enough to fit my finger through. That was on my wall, hidden behind the wooden frame. I go and look to see if there's anything there. I reach in with my finger, and I felt something. So I slide it out, and there was an old key. Not any kind of old key though, but the one specifically for the wind-up devils I had in the dream. I had completely forgotten about the dream up until this point, so it didn't really strike me as creepy or anything. A couple of nights passed since I found the key, and odd stuff started to happen. It was so bad that I didn't want to be in a room by myself. I knew there was someone with me. My door wouldn't open and slam shut. My lights would rapidly go on and off, and I would hear footsteps by my bed. All sorts of unexplained stuff was happening. One night, before bed, it hit me. The odd-shaped key was from my dream, and then I realized that my room was decorated the same way as in my dream. Everything suddenly made sense. There's been conspiracies that spirits can change their appearance, and also another saying that spirits are attracted to young children because of how much energy they have. What if they were people who died and were buried in the cemetery by my home, and they were changing their appearance so I wouldn't find them as scary, since, to me, they looked like kids too. Maybe this is just an odd coincidence, and all the other unexplained things are related to the fact that I lived very close to the cemetery. But I thought I would share it with you all. because still years later I think about my imaginary friends and that strange house, and I can't quite wrap my head around it. So about 3 or 4 years ago, when I was still in college, I went over to my friend's apartment because we had a group homework thing to do. It got pretty late, but we got there maybe at 6 or 7 p.m, and it was probably around midnight or 1 a.m. at the time. All of us were smokers, cigarettes, terrible habit back then. So we went down to the common area of the building, which had a pool and some seats to hang out. But more importantly, it was an outdoor area with no roof over our heads, to take a smoke break from all the homework, which had been mostly finished at this point, and just hang out. This whole pool area was completely deserted at the time except for us, but it was near the main entrance of the building and the only other person nearby besides us, as we were a group of 5, was the doorkeeper of the building. In any case, now that I've set the scene, this is what happened. It was around 2:30 or 3 a.m, and the sky all of a sudden got clear. And I mean not clear as in daytime, clear kind of like dawn, which was weird because in my city sunrise, it happens at about 5:30 to 6 a.m. So it's definitely still early, and we all got freaked out. Even the doorkeeper left his station and came near us and said, "It's really early to be this bright, right?" To which we all agreed. It was far too early in the AM for it to be this clear, and I mean it wasn't like it suddenly became daytime, but definitely clearer. We could see shapes of buildings and billboards that just seconds ago were too dark to see. We all got freaked out, but not scared, so we just kind of talked about it amongst ourselves. None of us had ever seen anything like that before. It was no later than 3:30 a.m. when this happened. We stayed there until 4 a.m, just talking and hanging out. Then I drove home. All this time it never got dark again, but I was in bed before it was normal for the sun to rise in my city, and never gave it another thought until I realized it could have been a glitch. I had never experienced something like that in my life before, and never have since. I went back to my friend's apartment and hung out at the exact same area at about those hours in the AM a bunch of times, after having that over the next 2 to 3 years of college. None of us ever experienced anything like that day again. It is completely out of the ordinary or normal for it to be as clear as it was at that hour in my city. I've never seen it happen again. It was 3 a.m, it was pitch black a second ago, and then it got clear like you'd expect at 5 or 6, just when the sun is setting and it's starting to get dark. I'm 26 and have lived in 3 different places and feel as though either something is following me or for some reason things are attracted to me. As a child, I would have dreams where people would visit me, and then the next day they would pass away. It started with small stuff like that, every now and then. Eventually I went away to college, and little things would happen in the apartment. Stuff falling over right in front of me, and my roommate. The attic being open when we get home, and things going missing. Those things could be explained rationally, I'm sure, but then one night as my roommate went to work, she put her dog in his crate, and I went and took a bath to get ready for bed. A few minutes later, I hear a woman say, "Benny, do you want to come out of your cage?" I call out to my roommate thinking she just got back, and all I heard was a brief silence, followed by furious barks and growls. I think someone's in my apartment. I open the door and Benny is out of his crate and run behind me in the bathroom. Meanwhile, here I am in my towel, looking around the locked apartment. Activity slowed a bit, but my roommate would experience scary things when I wasn't there, and she would always think she heard me talking to her from my room, but would always check and I wouldn't be there. I move out of there with my now husband to a new apartment, new state, and then the same stuff starts happening there. to the point of my dog freaking out about this one corner of the room daily. I started having night terrors, the same one over and over, about some black mist flying into our bedrooms to my side of the bed and a figure with a terrifying face moving in towards me. I would wake up screaming. Finally, here we are at a home now, where we have been for about a year. Again, the little things start happening. My husband works rotating shifts, and so to make me feel slightly safer, we got an alarm system and another dog. One night, I had my dogs on the bed, and I went to the kitchen to get some water. Halfway there, the door to my bedroom slams shut with such force that it makes the glasses in the kitchen cabinets clink. I walk back to the door, hoping my dogs were playing, and shut it, to find they are both cowering together on the bed, and my German Shepherd's fur is up while she is staring at the door. Another experience more recent was I was home alone. It was around 11 p.m, and I was getting ready for bed and turn on the alarm. I hear the door open at the front of the house, and I was thinking my husband was home. The dogs are going nuts and are jumping at the door. I call out for my husband with no answer. I check the alarm on my phone and it's still armed. Then I hear the door slam, very hard from the inside. So at that point I'm freaked. Then I hear men's voices right outside the window behind the bed. The dogs again go nuts and begin jumping at the window. I run to our back door. The dogs run out the back, barking ferociously. No one is there, and I call my neighbors to 1. Make sure there is no party, and 2. To ask them to help me look around. Nothing. No one. My neighbor even checked his security cameras on his front lawn, which has our place in the side view. No one came to the door. My dogs have been reacting to these things that I'm experiencing, and just getting anxious and whatnot about these random things. And now I have the same night terrors that I mentioned before. What do you guys think? When I was about 12, I had a terrible nightmare in which 2 aeroplanes collided in mid-air. It was extremely vivid, and I woke up in a panic. My bedroom was right next to the family bathroom, and after about 30 minutes of laying in bed freaking out, I noticed the landing light come on and knew that a parent was heading to the bathroom. Now by 12, I wasn't the sort to bother my parents about nightmares anymore, but I was convinced there was going to be a plane crash, so I rushed out to my mum and told her everything. She said that I was being stupid, and that I should just read and try and fall to sleep. The next morning my mum comes rushing into my room and pulls me out of bed and has my dad with her. She asks me to tell him about my nightmare, and then they both look freaked out. They insisted that I went downstairs with them to watch the news. I thought that they were pranking me or something, but when I got down to breakfast, the news was running, and it was about the Überlinger mid-air collision, in which on July 1st, 2002, Bashkiran Airlines Flight 2937, a Tupolev Tu-154 passenger jet, and DHL Flight 611, a Boeing 757 cargo jet, collided in the air over Überlingen, a South German town on Lake Constance, near the Swiss border. All 69 passengers and crew aboard the Tupolev and the 2 crew members of the Boeing did not survive. We worked out that I'd woken up around the time that the crash itself took place. Nothing like this has ever happened since. I'll be driving in the highway at night, and it's mostly empty. Then I'll notice a car in my mirrors coming up, usually on the left side, but I can't say for sure. It happened on the right side too. Then I'll go back to watching the road before checking my mirrors again. But when I check, the car is gone. I hadn't passed any exits, and I live in a semi-urban area where there are usually barriers on the side of the road, so there's no way the car could have disappeared off to the side. It's happened multiple times. It's not a common occurrence, but also it's happened enough times that I no longer attribute it to my mind playing tricks on me. I wonder if anyone else has experienced this strange event. It's around 4:30 AM here, and all the dogs in my neighborhood are freaking out. I get up to go let my dogs inside the house, figuring that'll calm things down a bit. I open the back porch door and look to my right where there is a fence line to another house. I look over there because it looked like there were some clothes hanging off the fence, and our neighbors have never done that, so I thought it was strange. Then I saw them. 2 men in black suits with no heads. I look at them for a good minute and make sure my eyes aren't playing tricks on me. I don't move, but they just stand there. I could tell that one looked heavier than the other, but that's it. I backed into the house, locked the back door and turned the light off. I go back into my room and tell my husband, who is now awake because of all the dog barking. I tell him I'm going to wait until it's light outside to get the dogs, because I just saw something I can't explain. I told him what I saw, and I said I feel like I sound crazy, but I saw this, and I'm not joking. He seemed like he believed me, but honestly, I don't know. That's probably why the dogs were barking. They must have this sixth sense. When I was a little girl, I tended to move around a lot, ever since I can remember. Since my parents worked at about 1 or 2 jobs at once. But one thing remained consistent. It was innocent enough for a child around my age. Roughly from 3 to 7, due to me moving around often, I never had any real friends for very long. So I made imaginary friends. I often wondered why at times, even though they would leave me from time to time, only to keep me up at night and getting me into trouble with my less than kind father. Though as I grew older, he got better at controlling his tempers. But then he had a hard time with that, which made me terrified to do anything around him. So I locked myself in my room whenever I wanted to play. You know, typical girl things. Dress up, dolls, puzzles, drawing, trying to sing like a Disney princess, and trying way too hard to hold out notes that put too much strain on your vocal cords. My imaginary friend, Lou, was never angry at me. In fact, Lou gave me confidence and bravery, and happiness was abundant. I called it Lou because, thinking back on it, Lou fitted feminine features whenever we played and had fun. But when my father was around, Lou became masculine and protective, though Lou consciously somehow knew it couldn't do anything physical to protect me from my father's random fits of anger and blind rage. Lou would simply go to another friend's house after my father's fists, but guaranteed Lou would return to me. So me being innocent and wanting to see my only friend, I waited for Lou, even sometimes pulled all-nighters just to be sure that she came home safely. One night, while pulling an all-nighter, my mum woke up for a midnight snack. She noticed my bedroom light was still on and came in assuming I'd had a nightmare. When she came into my room, she saw that I was picking up toys and picking out specific ones I had yet to play with along with Lou. "Honey, what are you doing? It's really late," my mother said. "But Mama, I'm waiting for my friend," I said, treating it as an everyday thing. But that only caught her off guard and gave me a questioning look, so I just continued. Lou said that she was going to her friend's house and will be back, like she always does when Daddy becomes angry. My mother was awestruck. Her baby girl was talking about an imaginary friend who would leave and come back, and chalked it up to an extreme imagination, but knew it was too good to be true, and looked around to the room. Our home at the time was a rather old trailer in a cul-de-sac, and it was previously owned by a family of 3 women who were self-proclaimed Wiccans and enchanted the home with protective spells. Once my mother's search was complete and unfruitful, she let out a sigh and let it be. Some words about Lou. I'm 18 and still live with my mum and sister. My father has moved out but visits every now and then, and so does Lou. I mentioned how Lou always went away after my dad had his hissy fits, but what followed him was misfortune. Whether it be getting fired or caught cheating on my mother, it was always something, which I noticed as I reached middle school and a bit into high school. All I know is that even now that I moved into a totally different house that isn't a trailer, Lou still protects me and keeps in touch with my dreams. However, new house, new issues, and I've been seeing Lou as more masculine than ever and more protective, even without my father around. Why is she like this? What's out to get me? I don't know, but it's not good. I've seen figures, apparitions, heard voices, and been physically attacked. I feel like I'm a target, but of what? I hope Lou will help me get the answers soon. This happened about 7 years ago. I was staying at my friend Diana's house. She lives pretty close to a small beach, which is really more of a vague shoreline, but it's still nice. We both enjoy going on adventures, so one night we decided to go for a walk, and ended up walking along the shore. Her dog Penny was with us, occasionally running out into the water, doing cute dog things. I'm not a huge dog person, so I'm not sure what kind of dog she was, but she was a medium-sized dog. Not big, but way too big to be called small. We were only there for 10 minutes before we heard a twig snap from the forest at the edge of the shore. Both of us froze, listening to see if we could hear anything. We thought we heard someone shushing someone else, but we brushed it off as being paranoid and remained on high alert. The tide was coming in, and there was only one way back to safety, a single path which we had come down on. Everywhere else was essentially a cliff covered in thorns and whatnot, not fun to climb. We started making our way back to the path, taking our shoes off since we realized we waited too long and wouldn't make it before the water reached us. As we were walking, we heard more twigs snapping in the forest and hushed voices. We looked at each other and paused. Diana asked me what we should do, and I really didn't know. Everyone at her home was asleep, so we couldn't call them, and we didn't want to call the police if it wasn't a dangerous situation. I ended up telling her we had no choice. We had to make it to the path before the tide came in. We start again, picking up the pace a little, coaxing Penny along with us. It's at this moment that we heard a growl and a low bark, followed quickly with more shushing sounds. I could hear the voices, though I don't remember what I heard them say. There were 2 men, and they had a dog. There are no houses this close to the shore. Diana's house is the closest, and it's a good 5-minute walk away. The forest that surrounds the shore is pretty thick, and it's not good for camping in. There's no viable reason for someone to just be hanging out there. We both registered this and start to run. I heard one of the men yell, "Go get him!" and heard the dog's collar jingle as it started to run. Penny was right behind us, so when we saw the silhouette of a dog in front of us, we knew it wasn't her. The dog started growling, and Penny was bouncing around playfully behind us, clearly not sensing this dog's aggression, as she was a very young dog. We stood still, unaware of what to do. The sound of twigs breaking was getting closer, and Diana carefully knelt down to get a rock and tossed it towards the forest, to which the dog and Penny went chasing after it. Diana was worried about Penny, but we both kept running and hardly stopped for a breath. When we made it to the path, before the tide I might add, we could see flashlight beams in the forest and heard the men cursing and clumsily maneuvering their way through the branches. We called for Penny as silently as we could, but she never came. We ended up having to leave without her as the men were getting too close. We ran back to her house and locked the door, and haven't talked about what happened since. Penny showed up the next morning perfectly fine, in case anyone was wondering. I've had a few strange encounters with sketchy people, but this one was the only time I ever felt truly in danger. One Friday, my stepmom picked me up to take me to my dad's house, like a usual Friday. We drove down our normal route home, which was through a wooded area which leads onto the main road, which we take directly to where my dad lives. Anyway, as we were driving through the wooded area, we were just talking, listening to the radio, where we came to an N-shaped road. Like I said, we were just chatting, minding our own business, when a car starts coming around the corner on the N-shaped road in front of us, with its lights at full beam. This is the middle of the day, so we can see clearly, and there's no need for headlights to be on. It seemed to be coming round rather fast, but we didn't pay it much mind. The road was very narrow in the woods, so as it approached, my stepmom pulled over like the normal procedure to allow this car to pass. Just to look up and see it vanish from reality in front of our eyes. This freaked us out a lot. From what I remember from the car, it had its headlights on full beam and may have been a white color, and didn't look really old either, maybe 90s plus. This event happened about 2 years ago now, and I remember it very clearly. I was working with a funeral director in my hometown, trying to spread awareness about addiction since I had lost my little sister to heroin/fentanyl. We got to talking one day and he said, "If the songs are playing on the radio, it's them." It struck me as odd at first, and then I started thinking about it and said, "Oh wait, I hear her songs sometimes, and there is always a tune to show it's her." Years went by and we hadn't spoken to him in a while. Then my mum kept getting sick. Turned out she had cancer. She claimed she beat it. Her breathing turned really bad, and I told her I'd take her to the ER, but she refused. She also kept grabbing at her back in pain. 2 days later, I got a feeling to call my mum. Then a baby cardinal landed on my railing in front of me, at the window, flapping its wings and screaming like baby birds do. I flew down to her new apartment. I had just moved her into there not a week earlier, and her car wasn't there. Then my phone rang, and it was the hospital. I flew there to find her intubated and brainwave counters, flashbacks to my little sister. My mum had serious pneumonia, and they found nodules on her lower back. I visited her daily, and the doctor thought she would pull through it. On Friday, April 27th, right before I was leaving for work at 5:45, the doctor called and asked if they could reintubate. Of course, I said yes. I pulled into work, and a very, very rare song came on the radio, and my stomach and heart dropped at the same time. I walked in and said, "If my phone rings, I have to..." And then my phone rang. The doctor wanted me to make the decision now. Nope, I'll be there in 20 minutes with my uncle. My mum wasn't going to pull out of it with a happy life. My uncle and I decided to let her go with morphine. We felt guilty as hell, because his son and sister had previously died from ODs, and that was what we pretty much did. I'm so sorry for not letting my mum grasp for every breath. She was miserable, and I decided I wouldn't go back to hold her hand, because I was afraid that she would see that I had been crying and didn't want her to worry. My uncle said he would stay, and as I was leaving, he told me to just remember happy thoughts. I got on the highway, and Taylor Swift's Shake It Off came on. My mum loved the video of the cops so much that she would ask me to play it over and over. The next song on the same station was George Michael, Keeping the Faith. I sang it as a 7-year-old, a punch in the face, and my mum was laughing her butt off when she said I was singing all the wrong words. When I called the funeral director, he asked me how I was. The next question was, "Have you heard the songs?" I told him everything I told you, and I didn't believe the coincidences. His reply was, "Man, I've got the chills. Anything you see might be a sign from a loved one. If I get super upset, which is rare, I will get into my car and the song Just Breathe would be on. That's from my mum, because I played it non-stop after my sister's passing." Last night, I had a glitchy experience. I bought oregano oil capsules, and I take them before bed. I specifically took one out, put it in my mouth, and swallowed it and left my room. I came back to my room and noticed that there was an oregano capsule on my bed. Weird, I thought to myself. I just took one. So I put the capsule back into the bottle, along with the others, and left my room. I came back to my room after showering, and the exact same capsule was on my bed in the exact same place as before. I started freaking out, because I remember taking a capsule specifically, and also putting the one that was on my bed back into the bottle. There was no one home but me, and then when I was walking out of my room, I heard my mirror that was hung up on the wall fall off and hit my record player, and I thought, this is gonna be messy to clean up. I walked back into my room, and everything was perfectly in place and nothing had moved. Am I having a stroke or experiencing a glitch? When I was very young, between the ages of 3 and 4, I had an imaginary friend. It was an older woman who wore a babushka. I would often describe her to my family as the witch from Snow White. As a child, that character would terrify me to the point that I couldn't look on screen whenever she was on. As a child, we had a playroom of sorts in the back of the house. The room had a sliding back door which led out onto the deck. I would often see her walking up my deck steps towards this room and be terrified. However, once she got to the door and entered the playroom, I'd no longer be afraid. Even though she was ugly looking and resembled a character I feared, I felt kindness and sincerity from her. She would play games with me, as I was a very lonely kid, specifically Connect 4. I became quite used to her presence. I would see her walking through my yard from other windows in the house and excitedly run to the playroom to meet her. I had no fear of her, and she always would just come inside and play with me for a bit before disappearing. I would talk to my family about my friend, and they would tease me, assuring me it was just my imagination. This went on for maybe a year, until I just stopped seeing her. For a few years following, my family would occasionally bring it up and tease me, but eventually we all kind of forgot about it. Fast forward to my high school days. Now, to understand the story better, let me describe the layout of the house. My living room has a sofa against one wall, and against another wall an oversized chair-type sofa with an ottoman. Whenever I had sleepovers with a friend, one of us would sleep in the sofa and the other on the big chair/ottoman. From the chair you could see the sliding back door that I mentioned previously. The old playroom was now converted into a dining room, and I was sleeping on the chair and my friend Krista on the couch. It was your typical teenage night. We had wine coolers, or two, maybe smoked some green stuff, and stayed up late watching TV. And this is where things get weird. The next day when we wake up, my friend Krista tells me about a weird dreaming/waking dream she'd had. She said that in this dream she woke up, but was laying on the big chair and not on the couch like in reality. So essentially we'd switched positions. She then looks over the back door and sees an old woman with a scarf wrapped around her head, looking through the glass at her. She then said she kind of knocked and waved at her, and my friend woke up. When my friend told me this dream in the morning, I immediately got a knot in my stomach. I had pretty much forgotten about my imaginary friend, and I had definitely never told her the story. It was so bizarre the way she described it, like how she switched sleeping spots and how she saw her through the door. I told my mum the story too, and she got silent and didn't really want to talk about it. She is a huge skeptic of the paranormal. As creepy as it is, I sort of feel like maybe this woman is somehow watching over me. Krista turned out to not be so good a friend, and as scary as this woman looked, she never seemed malevolent at all to me. Anyway, I just thought I'd share this story with you. Any thoughts on what this woman may be would certainly be appreciated. One time during midterms, I went to bed around midnight but did not fall asleep. I lay there thinking about different concepts on the exam, and the next day, and being a worrywart. Plus, I was wired on coffee. All of a sudden, it's like all the ambient noise is turned down. My fan, the AC, my parents snoring, and a different noise begins to pervade the room. The sound was of a dozen women laughing cruelly and evilly at me. It lasted for a few seconds, then I lay there filled with terror trying to make out what just happened. I was trying to ignore it, but the fear was so high that I couldn't ignore it. A woman in her 20s ran into my parents' room and begged my mum to sleep in her bed, and my dad take my bed. They agreed, and the whole night I could barely sleep because I heard whispering in my ear. The next day something awful happened to my father. The thing with my family is that there is a history of the occult, not in my immediate family, but some extended family members, and they hate my family. I really believe they orchestrated what happened to my father using dark magic, and came into my room that night to laugh at me, invisibly and malevolently. I know it sounds silly and crazy, trust me, and I've never believed all the stories my mum and aunt would tell me until this happened. It really opened my eyes to the supernatural, and I started having even more experiences. So this happened about 8 years ago. It's me and 2 friends in my car chilling in the driveway. We were talking and they were talking. I noticed this cat of pure white sitting 20 feet in front of us. Now my friend doesn't have a white cat, so I was intrigued. 5 minutes or so pass and the cat is still sitting in the same spot. I finally told my friends, "Hey, what's up with this cat in front of us?" All our eyes went to the cat, and it instantly vanished. We all saw it and began tripping out. One friend said it looked like it melted into the ground. I still question it to this day, and my 2 friends still remember that moment. I like to think I have a 6th sense. I don't really like talking about it because people think that I'm full of rubbish. It's more a feeling I get when they're around. It's up to them if they'd like to let me see them. It's more a feeling I get when they're around and I get goosebumps. It's my indication that a spirit is among us. I don't really go looking for it, if that makes sense. And it's not like I'll be walking down the street and get goosebumps, and I'm like, oh my god, they're a ghost. No, it's nothing like that. Anyway, one afternoon I was eating dinner with my boyfriend's family. Afterwards, we went to his aunt's house. For whatever reason, they were all in his cousin's room, a 15-year-old female. My boyfriend's sister and her boyfriend walk in, and I followed behind them. The door when you walked into the room was on the left side. As I walked in, I felt something push to the left of my lower back. I turned around assuming it was the doorknob hitting me as the door bounced back off the wall after I pushed it open. It wasn't. Somebody pushed me. Trying not to freak anyone out, I don't say anything, and I immediately got the goosebumps. Michael, my boyfriend's sister's boyfriend, told me, "Did he just push you?" And I said, "Yeah," while everyone in the room was looking at us like we're crazy. And I replied, "Wait, you can see him?" "Yeah," he replied. "I can't see him, I can only feel him." And he could see him, not feel. Weird, I know. Turns out we'd gone to her aunt's house because this old man had been haunting my boyfriend's cousin. She would wake up and see him standing in the doorway where he pushed me, standing in her closet and at the end of her bed. She would see him walking through the walls, and it was to the point where she couldn't sleep, and it was only when she slept alone in her room. I'm still not really sure why or what he wanted, or why he'd stand over her and just haunt her. I prayed the rosary in her name that night, and she has yet to be bothered by Old Man Greg again. When I was a child, my mother had a dream that I got taken and I went missing. She then started getting photos of me through the post, crying. And eventually there was a huge search party out for me. They found my remains in a cornfield, in my Thomas the Tank Engine pajamas, covered in blood. Obviously my mother was very upset about this nightmare, that she told a few friends and family, but she left one horrible detail out of the dream. So 2 weeks later, I come screaming into my mum's room, saying I had a nightmare, and I told her in my dreams this man took me, beat me. He kept taking pictures of me, and then he took me out to the back fields and bit off all my fingers before ending me. That one horrible detail my mother didn't tell anyone was that they found my body with all my little fingers missing. My mother threw my Thomas the Tank Engine pajamas out that morning. This happened a couple of summers ago when I was in the 7th grade. Me and a few friends were just hanging out at Long Beach in Gloucester, just playing with an aluminium bat and tennis balls. We got bored of just playing normal wiffle bat, so we decided to go do a home run derby. We decided to do it near the big stone wall that separates the beach houses and the beach. We said that if the ball goes over the wall, it's a home run. This works out fine for a bit, but we had to keep running up the stairs to get the ball out of people's lawns. I went up and got yelled at by some guy, so we looked for somewhere else to play. There's a large motor inn at the end of the beach that has many balconies, so we played there. Now, this is where things start to take a turn for the worst. We were hitting the ball towards the motor inn. We did this for a solid 20 minutes, until, of course, I hit the old man reading on his balcony. He yells and says he's going to get the manager. Us, being stupid, wait there, and then the manager comes and tells us that we can't play there. Here's where the beach creep comes in. This man, who's probably in his late 40s in a polo and scally cap, walks over to us and tells us that the manager is an arse. We agreed, just assuming he's trying to be nice or whatever. Then he takes the bat out of my friend's hand. Luckily I had brought my bat too, so I could hold it the whole time. Before I continue, my parents were at the complete other side of the beach, so they could not see any of this. The man then hits my friend's ass with the bat. Clearly uncomfortable, my friend says he's going to go for a walk. He didn't go to our parents because he wanted to see what was going to happen next. The man still holding the bat says that there is another good spot to hit home runs. The man then repeatedly says, I just want to hit a home run over and over, and then says, "Oh, I thought we were at the other beach. How about I drive you guys there so we can play?" We all say no thanks and that we want to swim. He then grabs the collar of my friend's shirt and says, "You're coming with me." We were all shocked as he started dragging my friend away. That was when I realized what I had to do. I went up to the guy and said, "I'll go with you." "Really?" He responded with a grin that still makes me terrified to this day, and I say, "Yeah," then hit him with my bat as hard as I could. He goes down instantly, and my friends start crying. We run back to our parents and try to call 911, and by the time they got there, he was gone. We left right away, and now whenever I go back there, my friend always jokes about how I saved his life. I would rather not meet that guy again. I was around 3 or 4 years old when I had my first imaginary friends. Though my personal memory of the experience is dappled by age, my parents reminded me of the incident consistently. Having what I believed to be an overactive imagination, I created not one, but 2 imaginary friends for myself. It started on the way to the local supermarket, when I slid from the far right seat of the back row of the car to the middle seat. My mother asked me what's the matter. "I have 2 new friends, Mummy." "What are their names, son?" After a minute of staring out the window, I replied, "This one's Jack." I looked out the other window. "This one's Mac." My mother was fascinated by my sudden interest with imaginary friends and asked me what they looked like. "They're both really old, Mummy, and have really long beards." My father at this point, being a devout ZZ Top fan, began singing La Grange. My mother, on the other hand, continued asking me basic questions about the 2 recently acquired friends. For the next 3 months, I took Jack and Mac everywhere with me. We had frequented one restaurant to the point that when the server saw our family, she automatically provided 2 extra chairs and placement mats for my friend. They never ordered anything, of course. It was one day that we entered our favorite restaurant that things got a little strange. The waitress prepared the table for us, with the 2 extra placemats as she normally would. When I informed her that I didn't have my friends anymore, she went, "Sweetie, where are your friends?" "They went home." "To our house?" "No, Mummy, they went to the graveyard. That's where I got them from." Both my mum and dad went white-faced, and I never had an imaginary friend after that. I was leaving a friend's house around 10 PM, back in mid-December. I was sober and wide awake, as my plan was to go home and finish some quick chores left over from the day. We had heavy rain and weird clouds all day. No lightning though. So when I was getting into my car and noticed the cloud cover seemed to have bright red glows in it, I assumed it was the light from the nearby university refracting strangely into the thick clouds. I got into my car and headed home. My house was a short drive away, 7 to 8 minutes tops. Suddenly the entire sky lit up pink, blue, green, and yellow, in rapid and repeating succession for 10 seconds. The lights seemed to have had no point of origin or bright center, but was coming from behind the clouds as I could see their shapes in front of the flashes. The sky was evenly bright from horizon to horizon, and there was no relative noise. Then it happened again. Random colors flashing brightly for maybe 5 seconds, then darkness. Then again, then 5 to seconds before it was totally dark once more. And that was the last time I saw it. I don't know how to explain this one. Near our house is a small greenhouse of a local tea company, which is often lit up with lots of wacky colors. And if the clouds are low enough, we will occasionally see the light very dimly reflected in the sky. I can't blame this on those. It was far too bright, too far-reaching, and was flashing, not holding a steady color. I also saw that recent video of the transformer exploding in New York City, and this was similar, but what I saw was more than just bluish-white. It was like as if the entire sky was weirdly colored that day for a few seconds at a time. No centralized source of light like a blown transformer would give off. This really freaked me out, for probably no reason, but I definitely stepped on it the rest of the way home. I haven't seen anything like that since, and we've definitely had some similar clouds. I know lightning is capable of giving off unusual colors, but in rapid and changing succession like this? When I mentioned it to friends, they all dismissed it with a quick, "Weird." Any input into this would be greatly appreciated. When I was 11 or 12, my older brother was 17 or 18 and was getting ready to go to a concert. He went to a lot of concerts and was kind of the rebel punk kid, so leaving late at night was not unusual. As he was talking to my mum about taking the car, I remember I became terrified. I was almost begging my mum not to let him go because I had this really bad feeling. I was convinced something bad would happen, and I had no real reason why. He was obviously getting impatient, and even my mum thought I was being silly. When I woke up next morning, my uncle had come over to make sure I was ready for school, because my mum had something to take care of. It wasn't until my lunch that my uncle came to school to pick up me and my sister, and explained that my brother was in hospital. He had been in a head-on collision with a semi-truck after falling asleep at the wheel on his way home. The first thing my mum said to me when I got to the hospital was something along the lines of, "I should have listened to you." I never had that happen to me before or since, and I'll never understand how it happened. All I know is that I have never been so convinced that something bad would happen, and the creepy part is that it did. He is better now, but at the time, no one would have believed it. First, they told us he wouldn't make it through the night, particularly without blood transfusions. Then they told us he'd likely never walk again. Fortunately for us, he proved both wrong. Now you'd never know anything had happened without him telling you. Throughout my life, I've had quite a few paranormal experiences. Call me weird, be skeptical, but I know what happened to me. I believe also that children are more susceptible to the paranormal, because they don't know what they're supposed to block out. This one particular instance, I don't actually remember. I believe it's true because my mom, dad, and sister all maintain that this actually happened. My sister was the one who witnessed it. To begin, when I was a kid, we lived in the south side of Chicago. I was 4 years old when we moved, so this happened sometime between the ages of 3 and 4, because I was able to talk. I had 5 imaginary friends: Juan, Carlos, Carla, Jorge, and Amy. Yes, I had 4 Mexican imaginary friends, and 1 white one. I don't know why. Amy was always seen as my twin. You know, the one who did the bad things, and I would blame her. I only remember Amy. My mom, dad, and sister are always shocked when I reminded them that I don't remember the other 4 imaginary friends at all. They disappeared when we moved to North Carolina from Chicago, and Amy was the only one that stuck. My sister is also 7 years older than me. One day while we still lived in Chicago, I was playing in the living room in front of the TV, while my sister watched me and made sure I didn't do anything to get myself into trouble. All of a sudden I screamed and started crying out of nowhere. My sister freaked out and went into the kitchen as my mom was coming to see what was wrong. My sister goes, "I don't actually know, she just started crying." My mum comes over to me and asks what happened, and as plain as day I say, "Amy bit me." Being a 4-year-old, that wasn't too credible, and my mum tried to blame my sister when she did. I go, "No, it wasn't Amanda, it was Amy, she bit me." So humouring me, my mum asks me, "Okay, where did Amy bite you?" And I pointed to my back. My mum lifts up my shirt, and in the middle of my back is a clear bite mark. So I was in the car with my mum today, and she brought up this story. And at first she goes, "When did that happen?" And then she remembered all of a sudden that she got this look on her face that was a mix between uncomfortable and confused. She goes, "Yeah, I didn't tell you at the time, but I never had any doubt in my mind that your invisible friends weren't really invisible, that they were spirits. And I think the 4 Hispanic children were good spirits and that Amy was something else, which you decided to call Amy because you would always talk about her getting into trouble or doing bad things. You would always blame bad things on her. I think you may have been onto something when you said that the 4 others were trying to protect me from her." The other day, I was walking back from the bus and walked down my street. I was sober, well rested, had eaten food and was wide awake. I had not been exposed to carbon monoxide. I noticed the houses were different, and I started to think I had somehow walked down the wrong street, though I had seen the site for my street when I got off the bus. I figured I'd walk to the main street and go back up my block, but then I saw my own address. I was confused. It was a slightly different house, a little newer, and it didn't seem to be a 4-plex like mine. I didn't know what else to do, so I knocked on the door. A woman answered, and I explained I was looking for 1234 Myrtle Court, and she said that this was it, and asked me what I wanted. I said I was a little lost, and was she sure? She was getting suspicious and annoyed and said, "Of course, why?" I stuttered something about thinking my house was here, and she asked if I was on drugs and threatened to call the cops, so I apologized and left. I was in denial. And at the end of the road I noticed a taco place that isn't on my street normally. Usually, it's a few blocks away. On my actual street, there's a mechanic, where there is a burger place across from it. I started to walking towards it because at least it was something normal. When I turned on the main street, things seemed to return to normal. I walked the few blocks down to my house, which was now there, and everything was in its usual place. I was so freaked out I avoided that part of the neighborhood for a while. When I did eventually go back, it was the same number but a different street, and the house looked different than the one the woman lived in. The taco place was on the wrong side of the street, and I had really just been hoping I was just turned around. I was 13 years old at the time, and we were living abroad with my father. During our sleep, it seems that I got visions of my grandmother. We woke up and we saw blood stains on our floor, like someone was walking towards us. Note that we did not see any animal, or were we injured. We also got news that then grandmother passed away. It was sad, but at the same time we were scared, because we slept literally with our father the following night. The same thing happened years before with my grandfather's death. I somehow woke up at dawn and saw a shining man at the time, but shrugged it off and went back to sleep. Then our father gave us the news that our grandfather had passed away. It is creepy, but at the same time touching that they may have remembered us on their time of death. I still pray that they are all good in the next world. I'm a high school teacher in downtown Pittsburgh. Our school is located in a historical building. Many of the buildings down there are original with cosmetic updates. I am also a psychic medium. To be specific, I'm clairvoyant, meaning I can see the deceased and other spooky things that aren't always human. Teenagers are emotional, and they bring a lot of baggage with them. This includes baggage of the dead type. I've seen doppelgangers, a man hanging in an unlit room, people attached to the backs of students as they sit in class. But the story I want to tell is something I believe original to the building or location, and not the students. I should add, our school has black marble in many spaces of the school. Our bathrooms are floor-to-ceiling quartz and marble walls. So are our main floors, and each elevator lobby. If you are someone into crystals and natural minerals, this may interest you in connection with the activity. There are 3 spirits that have been bothering me in the past few months. The first one I call Dirty Feet. When in the bathroom or sometimes in my classroom, I can see the knee down of 2 dirty legs, dirt and moss, and human waste on them. This spirit smells musty and likes to scare you. The second spirit is in our student's stairwell. It's this solid black figure, like coal. He's a man with a very wide grin and red eyes. He seems to breathe like a smoker, heavy and with steam coming off of him. This is not so surprising, as there are many fights and turmoil happening in the stairwells on the daily. Other teachers have commented on how much they dread stairwell duty, not because of the kids, but because of the feeling of dread and anxiousness they get. Spirit 3 is old. I do not get scared much anymore. However, this guy made me physically run out of room. There is this feeling of heaviness and being watched in our basement classrooms. In this room, I also have my printing press kept. I am in the basement a lot to manage the press, typically alone. Last week I unlocked the door to the room. I saw the deadbolt unlatch, but the door wouldn't open. I first figured something was in front of the door. The rooms tend to be messy. Maybe someone left something there. I push on it with my body weight, and eventually I was able to push it open slowly. When inside, I looked around the door, but there was nothing there to make it stick. Once open, it swung freely back and forth. I then remembered that this is the only entrance and exit, so there's no way something was put in front of it. I went to work, but felt very uneasy the entire time. I was not picking up on anything spooky, no ghosts in sight, just that feeling, the tingle between my shoulder blades. I kept looking over my shoulder, but no one was there. I started to look up, turned the lights off, and did something every dumb white girl does in a horror movie. I turned around, and I kid you not, in the back of the room by the printing press was a tall man in a hat with a yellow-toothed grin, waving at me. I have never left a room so fast. I almost forgot to lock the deadbolt. Now I have a few more theories about this waving man. I do not think he is the infamous Hat Man. I have seen the Hat Man and he is different. He's dreadful but not mockingly evil, and I could see this waving man's face. I could never see that Hat Man's face. He didn't have an earthly face. Now for the strange part. Horror lovers will know the disaster that is Poltergeist 2 with the creepy singing reverend. Well, I, a woman who sees dead people all the time, is deathly afraid of that character. And the waving man looked just like, you know who, the reverend. I believe whatever is down there is not human, not good, and also not from a movie, but projected itself to be something I have a strong fear of to scare me. It worked. I'm terrified. I couldn't even tell my fiancé about the encounter without getting choked up, which is very atypical of me. I have to go back down to that room to work, and yesterday I heard mean laughing when down there. No matter. I have a job to do and cannot avoid the area. Try as I might. I'm also not taking medication. We also get our chemical levels checked at the time because we're a school, so it's not the air, nor the CO2. Last year, I was driving down the US, Route 90 in Ohio, going to an old friend's house. We had driven out of the town that they were living in on unrelated business. On the way back to their old spot, 90W bound, we run into construction that was happening at the time on overheads. Pretty sure they restructured the fencing things, or something along that route. Anyway, we are seeing the exit signs for Lorraine, and I think to myself, hey, a few more exits and we're there. Here is where the glitch happens. I see the sign again. Also, the route has a very, very slight right curve as you pass under said sign. I think to myself, didn't we just pass this? And one of the other people in the car says, didn't we just pass this sign? I respond with, yeah, that was weird. The third person in the car goes, what are you guys talking about? And for the moments, talked about the event. I haven't thought about it too much. Maybe just an instance of tunnel vision. But on every fibre of my body and everything I love, I drove under that sign twice that day, and I will never forget that. My father is an ex-officer who was a sniper and a shooting teacher while he was in the army. In my country, military service is mandatory. All men and volunteered women serve as soldiers for a period of time. But my father was a professional soldier until he retired. Thus it was his job to shoot a gun. Thankfully he retired when I was little, so I never really experienced his duties in the army. But although he was retired, he never stopped working for a day. He was a builder, taxi driver, bus driver, plumber. He opened shops. He had a lot going for him. He had been doing whatever he felt like doing for the last 15 years or so. While I was in 6th grade, 13 years old, he had a rent-a-car shop where he rented and sold cars. We had a large collection of cars, from old and rusty ones to 0-kilometer shiny ones. I used to help my dad in the shop. I took care of it while my father was doing other work, and I would call him when a customer came. The work wasn't that great. We wouldn't have more than 3 customers per day to actually rent a car, and most of the days we would go empty. But to my knowledge, things were going great. I was only 13 and didn't really understand the expenses of having a shop. This went on like this for a little more than a year. Then we shut up shop, and my father went to get another job with an overall loss. We were having economic difficulties before the rent-a-car too, but that shop made everything worse. Our then current state was so stressed, and we barely had money to satisfy our needs. We were never rich, but those days were probably the worst we have ever been. I remember not being able to buy new shoes after my old ones were unusable, and I didn't have spare shoes. Luckily for me, as a boy, my feet were the same size as my mother's back then, so I wore her seemingly unisex shoes for about a week before my mother could scrape together the money to get me a cheap pair. I was still happy and I loved my family. I never thought about why I couldn't be rich, but apparently it was different with my parents. They were struggling and in pain because they couldn't even buy a pair of shoes for their son. They felt humiliated and fights in the house. My mother was also retired and still working, but they simply couldn't pay the debts. I knew my mother was in great stress. But what I didn't see was my father was in stress of at least that size, if not greater. So, on one of those days on a weekend, I was in my sleep and having a nightmare. I remember every second crystal clear, and it's one of those 2 instances where I remember my dream that smoothly, even though years have gone by. My parents and I were in our car, driving on a casually crowded road, a large road that one would usually see between large cities. I was on the back seat as usual, and my mother was driving. I could see that she was panicked, constantly turning her head to look at my father, and I was panicked trying to see my father as well, when I finally decided to lean forward to see what was actually going on. I saw that my father had his pistol in hand, as he is authorized to carry it, and sometimes he would, but I'd never seen him holding it in public. Also, with his other hand he was holding his shoulder. I could see that the shoulder was wet and that my father was in pain, but there was no blood. The pain on my father's face was there, and he was applying pressure to the wound. It didn't make any sense at all, the lack of blood. Then somehow my father was sitting next to me in the back seat, and I was applying pressure too. Now I was sure that it was a gunshot wound. I could see it bleeding, but still no blood, and my father was bleeding water. I don't know how, but I was sure he'd been shot. He was shot on his left shoulder close to the heart. Then I woke up to the sound of my house's front door opening. That door was not oiled recently and would make a loud noise while opening. My room was on the second floor, and I could hear my father putting on his shoes, and I knew he was going to work. I was scared from the nightmare, terrorized even, and I called to my father with a questioning sound. Even though I was sure it was him from the sound of his shoes, I was affected by the dream and wanted to ensure that it was him. He called, "It's me," from downstairs, and then came up to my room to say goodbye before he left. I hugged him and began crying. He hugged me too, and after a while asked what was wrong. I told him about the dream and that he was shot and bleeding water, and there was no blood. Then I saw him panic too. He told me it was okay, and he stood with me until I calmed down, and he told me to go back to sleep. I was calmed and did as I was told. After I woke up later on, I told my mother about the dream. We were a Muslim family, and my mother has a book about Islamic dream interpretation, and she told me to check it. I don't remember what the meaning was, but she told me this: seeing blood in your dreams cancels out any meaning the dream might have, so if you see blood, don't try to give it meaning. And that was true according to the book. Years after this event, I thought about the scariest nightmare I ever had, and this came to my mind. When I asked my father if he remembered about that day, he calmed me down. He got serious and told me he could never forget it. Then he told me that he took his own pistol with him that day, and that he was not heading to work. Apparently he rented a guy 2 or 3 cars, and that guy came out to be the head of a mob. Rather, some kind of local mafia. Not only was he not paying the rent for over a month, but he was refusing to return the cars. In that kind of an economic and family distress, my father could not let go and decided to take his property back by force. He said that he knew they were also carrying weapons, and even though he was a well-trained soldier, likely with better speed and aim than any of those guys, they were crowded, leaving my father with 0 chance of survival. I would have most likely have perished that day, my father continued, and even if I survived, I would have lived the rest of my life in prison for what I had done. I was going to go destroy them if you hadn't have woken up. Your dream hit me like a slap in the face, and I realized what I was about to do and what I was about to sacrifice. I had no idea about those men or the size of my father's distress. He wouldn't really show me. He would usually try to keep me out of it, so my dream cannot be a memory about my father talking about it. I find it quite unlikely to have a dream like this. My family can explain it away by saying it's their religion. They simply believe in a God to help us. But I am not religious, and I have no way to explain this with science. This is a true story that happened to me. To date, I have a rather powerful 6th sense. I can see, touch, and even smell supernatural things. If I feel a supernatural event, I get a scent that gives me an impression of the event. I can see spirits and ghosts quite clearly, and even touch them if I concentrate. This all comes from birth, which was also my end. You may be wondering how it is if I'm writing this. Let me go back. I was born in 1987. The day I was born there was a complication. The umbilical cord was wrapped around me, and I was born deceased. At least the doctors and nurses said so. They even filled out the certificate that I found many years later. I was pronounced dead, and had been dead for several minutes when I suddenly started wailing. The doctors and nurses rushed over to see the miracle that had occurred. It is my belief that due to this happening at such a young age, I may have managed to acclimate to the other side, and my coming back made such that my abilities are retained. Ever since then, I have been able to see spirits and even play with them. However, around 80% of them were good-natured, 15% were ambient about me, and the last 5 scared me. When I was 10, I came back from a school trip when we were camped out. I was passed out on the sofa, and it was late night/early morning, and I needed to go to the toilet by the window. On the 6th floor was a tall dark figure in all dark robes, and he pointed at me as he glided through the window. Its face was featureless and then stopped as if regarding me. It then waved me goodbye and vanished. To this day I still remember the cold feeling in my body. My body wanted to lock itself up, like sleep paralysis, but I was able to fight it off, albeit partially. The sheer cold sensation, the cold sweat forming in my back, the hairs on the back of my head standing up. That entity that visited me was dangerous. If you need a better picture, imagine a Dementor but faceless, kind of like Slender Man. To this day I continue to read any book I can find on spiritual protection, that I feel are not bogus. Can someone please help me explain this? It's really weirded me out. I was napping in my childhood room in my old bunk bed around 5 PM, which I share with my older sister. I'm napping in the top bunk, which is relatively close to the ceiling and against a wall. Walls and ceilings are a smooth blue color. My sister is chilling in the bottom bunk on her laptop. We are 23 and 25. Both came home for the weekend for my brother's birthday. She answers the phone call, which wakes me up. I open my eyes, and all over the walls and ceiling are small triangles with rounded corners and dots in the middle. Each cluster of triangle forms a pattern of flowers, 5 triangles each, all the tips facing towards the center. These flower clusters all lined up evenly and orderly, covering my walls and ceiling everywhere. They weren't scattered randomly. The pattern wasn't a specific color, translucent or transparent. I stared in shock, confused and amazed for 2 to 3 minutes, before shutting my eyes for 3 more minutes and opening my eyes to see they were gone. Now, to get into the details. I've had sleep paralysis before. This wasn't it. I was very much awake, could move, and even sat up to check out this pattern. I often have false awakenings too, but I assure you I was very much awake. There was no strange reflection of light, nor was the light shining in my eyes so that I could have imprinted a pattern when I looked around. The pattern stayed on the walls whenever I moved my eyes. It didn't move with my eyes. The pattern was so technical that it's why I explained it as a force field-like. It reminded me out of something of a sci-fi movie. At first I thought it was my contacts. Maybe they were dry because I fell asleep with them. I've never ever had that happen to me before, and I often fall asleep with my contacts. Plus, that pattern, it was so particular. I've never seen that pattern anywhere before, but something about it was almost computer-like. Has this happened to anyone before? I'm just trying to figure it out. It's so weird. I just had to share it. This story was told to me by a professor who I trust very much. While he was camping and hunting in Montana, he had a strange vision. He was sitting on a hill looking for a deer to shoot, and out of the forest walks his elderly mother. He's taken aback because his mother lives in Slovakia and has never left her country. His mother says she loves him and walks away. At this point, my professor is freaking out. He packs his stuff and goes back into town and calls his mother overseas. She answers and laughs at his story. He still feels unsettled, so he gets a flight and flies back to see her. He spends a few lovely days with her, and in the morning before he's about to go, he wakes up to find his mother has passed in her sleep. My professor grew up in war-torn Europe, escaped the Iron Curtain, and lived as a street artist in Paris. Then became a 10-gallon hat-wearing Slovak in Texas. But somehow, this story sticks out a lot when I think of him. Rest in peace. My husband and I have a 70-pound pit bull mix who looks mean but is a total sweetheart. She is never aggressive and doesn't bark without reason. Her name is Candy. We take Candy everywhere. She is spoilt rotten and loves meeting new people and getting rubs. We stopped by 7-Eleven in our less than super neighborhood at about 9 p.m. one night to grab some beers and snacks. My husband went in and I waited with Candy. She was restless, so we got out the car and I let her sniff about and say hi to her favorite store clerk who was out smoking. A woman came out. Without being judgmental, she looked strung out by both narcotics and general life. Skin and bones, ratty hair, and needle marks freckling her arms. I nodded politely, and she said hi as she got into the passenger seat of the car parked next to our SUV. I'm intrigued, but it's not shocking for this neighborhood, so I forget about it. My hubby comes out of the store, and we all hop into the car. He is telling me about a Redbox special and getting Candy settled in the back seat. I look over at the car the woman got into, a white Nissan. There's a large man in the driver's seat, and I notice him, and then Candy goes ballistic. She's barking and growling, and throws a total fit in the direction of the Nissan. I'm shocked at her behavior and look at the car again when I see the oddest thing. The man doesn't look scared or mad or even annoyed. He puts his head down and covered it with his hands. Hubby and I both saw it and found it strange. Like I said, Candy is an intimidating looking pup. An angry or fearful response wouldn't have been shocking, but hiding his face from us? The woman is hidden by the support beam, so I can't see her reaction. It still sounds silly. My husband and I are really sketched out, and Candy doesn't react like that ever, especially to people minding their own business in their car. The guy must have had some insanely bad energy for her to lose it. I think dogs are attuned to that kind of thing. So we pull out, paranoid, and hubby takes a few turns even though we live on the same street as the 7-Eleven. We get home, set up a movie, and enjoy our beer and Cheetos. The weird incident slipping from our minds, and 30 minutes into our movie, Candy absolutely loses it, scratching at the front door, growling and barking with her hackles raised. We jump up, instantly on edge, and I go to peep through the living room blinds that face the street. The Nissan is creeping down the street at barely 10 miles an hour. We don't have a garage or carport, and our car is on our front yard. The Nissan stops, the driver obviously recognizing our car. I grab my shotgun. Luckily, the lights in front of the house were already off, so we weren't visible, and we crouch below the windows, and my husband calls his uncle, as police have a habit of not responding in these lower income areas. But this time, the Nissan is in the driveway. My hubby is looking through the peephole. The woman gets out. She looks cheerful and goes to the front door and knocks. "Hey, you guys want to party?" We don't respond, but we let Candy keep at it. She's barking and growling, sounding scary, like a damned hellhound. "Come on, we don't bite." My husband tells them to get lost, and I cock the shotgun right by the door. The woman starts laughing hysterically. I'm looking through the window, and the man gets out of the car with a handgun by his side. It's a busy road, but no one notices, and he shouts, "Open up." My husband replies, "Leave while you still can. We have a shotgun and a very angry dog." He laughs. "I'll shoot that mutt in the face." We're panicking. At this point, we have called the cops, and my husband's uncle is on his way. We stand our ground, and they start circling the house, Candy following them at every window. Finally, the uncle arrives. He's a big guy, ex-cop, MMA fighter, and armed to the teeth. My hubby takes the shotgun and heads out. He and his uncle head around the back of the house where the two are banging on the windows. I come out, but hang back with Candy on her leash. The last thing I want is her getting hurt, but I know she makes a huge point. Our neighbours joined us in his PJs with a rifle, having heard the crazy shouting. The girl starts crying, saying that they were just playing and that it isn't a big deal. The guy puts his hands up and says he isn't looking for a fight. The two got in the Nissan and drove off. It was only then that I noticed they had no plates on their car. The police arrived minutes later and took statements. We didn't expect much to come from it. My friends can't imagine that we are still in the house, but ironically we are having a hard time finding a new place that will take pit bulls. There is not a chance that we'd abandon our girl, especially after the show of bravery and so many others, as she bit someone who broke a window and tried to break in a few months ago. So we just keep looking. I strangely don't feel too uneasy. I think our neighbour and family made a clear point, but I do wonder what those two were doing and what they think they saw in us. Stay safe, guys, and trust your pets. They know. Once, about 7 or 8 years ago, I was on a road trip with my family. We had a wonderful vacation in Disney World for a week, and we were driving back home to Houston from Orlando. I had fallen asleep in the back seat, and I have no idea how long I had been asleep for. I swear 100%, hand on the Bible, I remember having the most vivid dream of burning alive. It was so hot, and I just felt the fire burning me. I could hear it crackling, and I could hear a faint scream. I could even smell the smoke in my dreams. I thankfully awoke when my mum had to slam the brakes pretty hard. I wake up sweaty and anxious. There was just something off. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I asked my mother why she slammed on the brakes, and she said something about traffic starting randomly on the freeway. We are in the slow, bumper-to-bumper traffic for 10 minutes. This was enough to let me catch my breath and reflect on my dream and tell my family what I'd seen. Then we came up to why there was random traffic. A car had slammed into the pillar of an overpass and was entirely engulfed in flames. No ambulance, no fire trucks, no police, nothing had arrived yet. Just Samaritans pulled over trying to help whoever was inside to get out. Immediately I knew they weren't alive, and I was just experiencing what they had experienced. I burst into tears. Never will I forget it. Premonition? Glitch? Who knows what it was? I hope their passing wasn't difficult. Early one afternoon, my wife and I decided to head to the store. It was a clear and sunny summer day as we approached a one-way turn up ahead. We were 150 yards away, when suddenly we noticed the figure of a woman emerge from the road, moving oddly and seemingly putting on a dress. We deemed it odd. We figured they must have been down in the sewers and crawled out of the manhole. But upon reaching the end of the street, there was no manhole, only the solid pavement of the street. The woman, disheveled and barely dressed, walked into an alleyway behind a strip mall. I'd seen this woman around town before, and she is very clearly mentally ill, often ranting and raving like lunatics as she walks down the street. But this kind of event fried my brain for a while. The whole thing was very surreal, as we clearly saw this woman appeared to have crawled out of the street, but there was nowhere she came from. It left us pretty unsettled, and we still are to this day. I would first like to say I have always been interested in the paranormal. I believe my experiences have something to do with them, and without them, I would probably be one more skeptic. I'm a 34-year-old female, born and raised in Virginia. My first and scariest experience happened when I was 5 years old. It was a weekend, and my sister and cousins had a sleepover. We were all sleeping on the living room floor with pillows and blankets everywhere. I had woken up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. The entire house was asleep, and as soon as I awoke, I had the feeling that I was being watched, so much that I had to have every light on and left the bathroom door open. As I was walking back to my place amongst my sleeping cousin and sister, I switched the lights off and left one light on in the kitchen and laid back down in between two of my cousins. Because we were sleeping on the floor, there was a room around our heads for someone to walk or sit. The moment I laid my head down, I opened my eyes, and there, right by my head, was this girl sitting about 5 inches from me. She had long, wavy brown hair and was wearing an old-fashioned nightgown with lace around her collar, but her face was non-existent. It was like looking into a black hole. Although I could see the hair that fell on her non-existent face, she was leaning one arm and looking down at me. I instantly felt a sense of dread. I was going to ask her who she was, but in that split second, something inside told me, don't ask her, because she will say your worst nightmare. So instead I threw the blanket over my head and prayed she would go away. It took me forever to fall back asleep, but I finally did. Being only 5, I assumed it was just a ghost. Fast forward about 16 years. I'm now at my mother-in-law's house. She had invited a Jehovah's Witness to come and talk. While they were talking about different religious things, I was back and forth from one room to another, and I would listen for a bit and then go back to whatever I was doing. They started talking about demons. Now this woman had no knowledge of me or the past experience I just mentioned. She began saying that demons can take the form of anything, except they do not have the ability to make a human face. She said the human face is a holy thing, and that a demon will just look like a black hole. Obviously, I was in shock. Up until that moment, I thought I had just seen an ordinary but terrifying ghost. The dread feeling that I felt when I saw this thing was like pure evil. My other experiences aged 10 laying in bed trying to fall asleep was when something whispered in my ear. I could not understand what was said. This is not the only time something whispered in my ear. The house I lived in when my son was born was definitely haunted. Although my husband, sister-in-law and her boyfriend lived there, I was the only one to ever experience anything. I was always up late and alone, since my son was only weeks old. I would stay up, and he'd wake up at 2 a.m. for feeding, after which I would go to sleep. I always felt like something was there, and that I was definitely not alone. One evening as I bent over to pick up my son from his bouncy chair, whatever was there whispered in my ear saying, "Hello." Now I could feel the breath hit my ear when this happened. If I had closed my eyes, I could have sworn it would have been an actual person. Another evening, not too long after this whisper, I was doing the dishes. Everyone was home, but they were all in their rooms watching TV. I heard my sister-in-law stand behind me, and she said my name, Sandy, like she wanted my attention. I turned around and said, "Yeah?" But nothing. I was completely alone. Now, by this time, everyone knew about what I was experiencing, and it was kind of an ongoing joke in the house. I think the spirit was drawn to me because I had my son. Maybe I was more sensitive to the other side because of that, but honestly I don't know. Another night I was in my bed feeding my son, and it was a little after 3 a.m. The room was completely dark, and my fan was on. I was still a little warm, so I was staring at my fan, and thought to myself, when he is done eating up, I'm gonna go and push the button to make the fan oscillate. All of a sudden it started moving back and forth, as if no one had touched it. I was the only one awake, and I was staring at the fan when it happened. Obviously this spirit was helpful. Like I said, I never felt like it was harmful or evil. I had a dream one night that I was talking to my grandfather's sister. Her name was Denise. Now in my dream she looked very sick. She was sitting in a chair and I stood next to her. I asked her what was wrong and she said, "I don't know, I keep having these seizures." I asked her if she was going to be okay and she said, "I don't know." That was the end of the dream. Now at the time Denise lived in Florida, so I never saw or spoke to her, and I'd never dreamt about her before. The morning I woke up, I called my mum to tell her about this random dream. My sister answered the phone and I said, "Where's Mum? I need to talk to her." That's when my sister tells me that my mum had flown to Florida the night before because Denise was reaching the end of her tether. Up until that time, I'd never had a dream like that before nor since. Let's hope it stays that way. This happened when I was really young. I think I was the age of 5 or 6 at the time. My mother was a very high-profile businesswoman and was opening a new office for her business in a different city. She wanted to spearhead the operation, and so the 3 of us moved very quickly. This was happening at the end of the school year, so when we arrived I had plenty of time to relax and get accustomed to the new house. The house was beautiful and very big, extremely spacious and quite old, and needed to undergo some work. My parents were thrilled, but always incredibly busy. My mother would stick to the back room and type away furiously on her computer, ploughing paper after paper, having them being spit out the printer to be sent to the new office to prepare the teams. My father, as a freelance photographer, was sometimes here and sometimes not. It just really depended on the clients. There'd be a few hours where my parents might not be home and told me to never open the door and to stay home like a good girl, and other times when people would be over to look after me. Honestly, the time I'd be alone would be very rare and very short, and my parents made sure to lock every single door in the house and window so that I had no way of getting out and no way of letting anyone in during these periods. It was around this time that I got lonely, and I started conjuring up imaginary friends. Although as to the imaginariness of this friend is debatable. The friend I created was called Sally. She was a girl a bit taller than me. I estimate now that she must have been at least 9 or 10, as she was a fair bit taller than I was. She was always really sweet to me, and we would have fun playing games together. We loved playing Connect 4, Ring Around the Rosie, and all sorts of things, and just generally have a great time. So when my parents were busy, or when I was alone, I always had something to do. When I told my parents about her during breakfast, they just assumed that she was your standard imaginary friend, and kind of shrugged it off. Then one afternoon, as I was alone, we were playing a game, I can't remember what, and she beckons me to come down the stairs and that she has something to show me. That's when she takes me to the very bottom of the staircase, where we have a little cupboard. She tells me to open the door, and I look inside. There's just a whole load of junk, and I look around, and there's nothing really of interest that I can play with. She tells me to look at the end, and when I look further in, the door slams shut, and I can't open it. The light goes off too, and at this point I'm terrified. I go through the junk in the dark and start hammering my fists on the door, pleading, demanding to be let out. I start crying in the darkness, and after a while I start to get scared. What if there's something in there with me? I was so betrayed and upset. My friend had just literally thrown me into a dark closet and left me there. I was crying for what felt like hours, but honestly was no more than 25 minutes. My mum came home while on the phone, and I remember vividly screaming as I heard her phone conversation. The moment she said, "Hold on a sec," did I hear her running up to the cupboard and throwing the door open. I was crying, and I had actually wet myself in fear. She wondered what the hell was going on, and when I told her it was my imaginary friend, she gave me a blank stare, hung up on the phone, and went and got me changed, gave me a bath, and we had a little chat. She asked me to describe my imaginary friend with her, and I told her that she was this little girl who was a bit older than me, who had blonde hair down to her shoulders and these really striking blue eyes, and was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. She gave me a quizzical look and asked if the little girl had something on her face. I noticed now that she was trying to not ask a leading question, and I said that her face was littered with freckles and that she had a very strange cut around her chin. At that point, my mother went silent and asked me if I was sure. I said yes, and with my fingers showed her roughly how big it was on her chin, because it led all the way from her chin to roughly halfway up her jaw. Didn't look very nice. She just tried to calm me down and told me to forget about it and that everything was okay. I was never visited by her again, and I was glad to be. But many years later, when I was talking to my mother, did she bring up imaginary friends and asked if I remembered the one I'd had. I told her I did, and that I wasn't very happy and fond of her. She told me that she had something to tell me. The imaginary friend I had was actually my mother's younger sister. When my mother was quite young, her family died in a car accident. She was only about 7 at the time, so roughly the age I was when I started seeing the spirit. She was the only survivor of the crash and was raised by her grandparents. Her sister had had that same cut on her chin the day she died, because a few days before that, they had been playing in the garden and she cut herself with a piece of glass. My mother remembers her sister that way because that was the last way that she saw her, wearing jeans and a top. She was very freaked out that day she gave me the bath, and I was even more freaked out hearing it now. I don't know why she was mean to me, my auntie. Maybe she was jealous that my mum survived and she did not. Either way, I don't want to see my not-so-imaginary friend again. I was in my bedroom sorting laundry, and I was listening to a YouTube video on my phone. I have YouTube Red, so my phone was locked while the video played. I thought I'd heard a strange noise and thought perhaps one of the dogs was getting into something. I had thought to myself, wow, I really can't hear over this radio, I should probably pause to listen. But my lazy ass decided not to, and I continued sorting laundry. My boyfriend was on dog watch anyway, so it wasn't my problem. Then for no reason whatsoever, the video just stopped playing on my phone and fell silent. It just stopped, and I chuckled to myself because I knew how strange that was. I took the opportunity to listen for the strange noise and heard nothing. I ended up checking to make sure the dogs definitely weren't getting into anything, because I thought that was a clear sign from the universe to go check. Everything seemed fine, so I resumed listening to my video and sorting laundry. This next one is when I was sitting on my couch in the living room watching TV. I had seen the dog going into the kitchen, and seeing as he's a 5-month-old puppy, I didn't like when he's out of sight. I called for him to come to me, and instead of running out the kitchen like he should have, he came running out the hallway coming from the back bedroom. I know for a fact I had literally just seen him go into the kitchen. This last thing happened this morning, and I'm still quite shaken up over it. On Sunday morning I had woken up to find that neither my boyfriend nor I had remembered to lock the front door. So last night I had double checked that the door was locked before heading to bed. This morning I had woken up and did my usual, which was roll out of bed, plop myself on the couch in the living room to browse social media while I convinced myself to wake up. I lay there for 15 minutes until I decide to start my day. I sit up off the couch and look up at my front door. It's open about a foot. Surprisingly, my first instinct was to find the cat and make sure she didn't get out. I ran all over the place calling for her and then ran into my bedroom to wake up my boyfriend. At this point, my cat came out of her sleeping place to greet me, and I was relieved to see that she was safe. In my panicked state of mind, I had told my boyfriend what had happened, and he asked me if anything was missing. I'm not sure why that thought never occurred to me. He got up and checked all the rooms and closets to make sure no one had broken in, and we found nothing amiss. I have no explanation as to why or how the front door was open. I do wish to add one more thing that happened that was very strange. This happened about 2 weeks ago. I was just finishing up cooking dinner, and my boyfriend was going to go run to the party store to grab some pop. I was standing in the kitchen at the stove. Our front door is right outside the kitchen, and maybe 30 seconds after he left and shut the door, I saw the door start to swing open. I thought he had forgotten something and was coming back inside. My 1-year-old dog was sitting right outside the doorway, acting a little excited. And after a few moments go by and I don't see him come through the door, this raises some concerns. I work up the courage to go look behind the door or the doorway, and no one's there. Thank goodness I have a highly trained dog, and she didn't run out the door. I immediately call my boyfriend and tell him what happened. We both kind of agreed he must not have latched the door all the way. After what happened with the door today, I'm not open to believing that something is just wrong with the front door. We tried playing with the door today just to try and recreate it happening on its own, but we couldn't get it to do it. I do, however, stand by what I said in knowing the door was locked last night. I had a nightmare one night, before my friend passed away, where death, represented by a tiger, trapped me and scratched my hand before leaving. I woke up, feeling completely unsettled all day, and was crying. I had this lingering feeling that something bad was going to happen. The next night another dream, but this time in a shadowland. There were 5 people, one to my right who I couldn't see, and one after them named Ben, and 3 more that were just shadows I couldn't make out. I don't know how I knew, but I knew this place represented death or some kind of other world. The person to my right asked, "Do you really have to go?" to Ben, without speaking to it. Then I woke up and cried. I thought it was the end for me. The nightmare didn't feel like nightmares, they felt like premonitions. I wrote both dreams down in an online journal I keep, and I told my ex that it was going to be the end for me. I wanted people to know that I felt it coming. I got the call later in the morning that my friend had passed. The craziest thing is that it was completely sudden and out of the blue. She was young and healthy, or so I thought. I'm a strong believer in the pliability of the brain. You can completely fabricate existences to protect your psyche. If I hadn't written down the experiences in a date-stamped online post or spoken to my ex about it, I would have convinced myself that I made the story up in my mind, after the fact that I had to cope with her passing. When I was really young, under 8, we lived in an old hotel. The hotel had been built in the late 1980s. It was in a very small town next to railroad tracks. My sister was 1 year younger than me, and we shared the same room until we moved to another house and got separate rooms in 1980. We would both tell our parents about the various people we saw and talked to in our room. Typically, we only saw them at night. We also saw them in our dreams. The one I remember most was a soldier that had been blown apart. I don't know when he was a soldier from. He was scary at first, but he was more scared and confused than scary after a while. Both of us just accepted having them around. Our parents just blew it off as overactive imagination and having imaginary friends. Now you might be tempted to blow it off in the same regard, however we have independent validation. A few years later my aunt and cousin moved into the house. My sister and I never told my aunt or cousin about what we had seen. To us it was perfectly normal. My parents had never told them either. My cousin spent one night in that room, and after that she would never go back in. My aunt started asking questions about ghosts, hauntings and the like. My parents brought up what we had said when we were younger, when we all got together and they asked my sister and I about it. We both were like, "Sure there are ghosts there, what's the big deal? We told you about this when we lived there." I don't remember many details of the individual ghosts at this point, but I remember the old-time clothing the most. Big billowy dresses, top hats and overalls. The soldier I remember being in the olive drab style clothing, and I seem to remember the legs being mangled and bloody, perhaps part of his face too. Unfortunately, the building is now long gone, so no real follow-up is possible, but I wonder if other people grew up in a haunted house. Today I arrive at work and do the usual when I get in. Go to my desk, set down my purse and clock in. Now everyone at work carries walkie-talkies. It's how we communicate to each other because we are spread out throughout multiple buildings. Everyone has their own walkie and is labelled with their name on it. Part of my morning routine also includes grabbing my walkie so I don't miss it out on any useful information. We have a station where all the walkies are kept on charges at night, so when I go and grab mine, I check to make sure I've picked the right one. This is important to note, because most people might not double check this. But I have another girl who's got a similar name to me. It's only one letter off. Every time I grab my walkie from the chargers, I always have to double check that I have my walkie and not the other girl's. So I know for a fact that I grabbed mine with my name on it. Now sometime later, I grab my walkie out of my pocket as I go to use it for the first time today, and read the name on the walkie, Matt. Now Matt absolutely never uses his walkie, so it's always sitting on the charger. There's no way I just accidentally picked up his walkie-talkie and misplaced it with my own, seeing it as he never uses it. I went back to the charging bay, and sure enough, there's mine sitting on the charger. I know with absolute certainty that I picked my own up this morning. I physically picked it up and double-checked that I had it with my name, and not the other girl's, before putting it in my pocket. My family has a long history of mental illness. Therefore, whenever we get calls from family members, we assume the worst. It happened multiple times. First, my cousin was pregnant, and she was super excited for the birth of her baby. It was around the 5th month, and my mother and me started to hallucinate and see dark figures in the shape of a baby around my house. Since it happened to both my mother and I, we both got scared, and did nothing about it. About a week later, my cousin miscarried, and we stopped seeing these apparitions. Secondly, my grandma was very sick, and my mother and I started hallucinating again. This time, instead of babies crawling around corners, we saw slumped figures. Not even a week passed, and my grandma had perished after they told us she was recuperating. Finally, and probably why my mother and I are not scared of these apparitions, my sister had been diagnosed with depression for a long time. Since she is older, she lived in another country, and my mum and I were in the kitchen of the hallway with all the lights off, and we simultaneously freaked out, and we saw a figure that reminded us of my sister. My mum took this as a warning to call her immediately. Her roommate answered, and my mum asked her to check on her. Turns out my sister had tried overdosing on sleeping pills, and her roommate found her with just enough time to save her life. Ever since then, I believe that whatever this apparition is, it's probably someone or something that's trying to help us by giving us a warning beforehand. Growing up as a small child, there was this really sweet girl who would come over and play pretty much every day. She never really talked about herself or her family, and 5-year-old me didn't really care too much about it anyway. This girl was a very good friend, and she always had her cat with her. That was super friendly, and just like her. I remember it having the softest fur I have ever touched before or since. Well, we were friends for about 2 years before we had to move, because my dad found a better job in another town far away from where we were living at the time. It was kind of heartbreaking to say goodbye to Precious, the girl, and I promised that I wouldn't forget her. Fast forward 10 years, and I'm having a conversation with my mum and make an offhand remark about Precious. What my mother told me was kind of scary, but at the same time kind of cool. Precious had been dead for about 30 to 50 years before I was even born. Even her pet cat was a ghost. Thinking back on it, her clothes were a bit odd and out of date. She wore a lot of those summer dresses that were really popular in the 30s and 40s, and she had a tendency to use phrases that I didn't quite understand, though she was more than happy to explain them. As an adult, it would have been pretty obvious that there was, at the very least, something very odd happening, but for a child, I didn't notice anything. At our school, we have an upstairs and a downstairs. Well, I just got out of class and had seen a girl downstairs, and then went upstairs to sit where I usually do, and she comes out the office, and this is strange, because she was walking somewhere else, and the only way she could have made it there was if she passed me without me noticing, or she went outside and up the ramp really quickly, and she had just a shirt and it was freezing outside. This has happened another time with another person, I think the same day or the day before. In my class, I saw this girl grabbing some brown paper towels for a project we were doing, and then went to go get some, and the paper towel was white? My mother is a bit superstitious, and has always told me that we have something special going on with the spirit world. My whole life, weird stuff has been happening, so I think she might have a point, although there is surely a scientific explanation out there. I've always had a feeling that something is watching over me. The first incident I can remember that happened to me was when I was little and playing on a beach at our cabin. I was sitting under a tree alone playing in the sand, when all of a sudden I heard a strong snapping sound from the tree above me. I looked up and couldn't see anything. I stood up to get a better look, and there was this strange feeling, like a huge urge or someone pushing me. Move, go somewhere, just move. I took a few steps and a huge branch dropped right where I was standing and stuck in the sand. I got startled, so I just stared at it for a moment, pulled it out of the sand, and ran inside to tell everyone. I got the "yeah, right" treatment. The sand was very fine, and it had good enough velocity and was enough weight to stick to the sand, so I guess the damage was done. It had hit me in the head. It was also so pointy and straight that my grandfather took it as a walking cane for his forest walks. I have had similar guidances throughout my life that I can't explain rationally. My mother has told me about similar incidents that she's had. The creepiest I can remember happened at my childhood home, as my parents had just moved into the house. She was cooking dinner and felt something behind her. She turned as she thought my dad had gotten home without her noticing, but there was no one there. She kept cooking, and there was clearly a presence behind her, with breezes of air and temperature changes as it moved. My mum, freaked out, left the food there and walked out the kitchen. The presence followed her to the corridor and started guiding her towards the room in the hallway. It was a bedroom that was still full of moving boxes, and she had an urge to go stand in a corner as she felt increasingly uncomfortable, as if something was in the room, but the corner was safe. Suddenly, she had a strong thought to look down, similar to my experience with the branch. Just this strong, commanding, "look at the corner," in her head. She looked at the corner and saw a glimmer between the floor and the wall. There was a golden necklace in the crack, and she picked it up, and the presence was gone, and she felt filled with a safe, warm feeling. She still has that golden necklace, and has no idea who it used to belong to. I had not long passed my driver's test, and as an 18-year-old, I was never not driving my car. It was late one night, and I had just dropped off a friend at his house. I was driving up a very familiar road to get onto the motorway. There were no other cars in sight, and my music was pretty loud. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a small black cat seemingly waiting to cross the road that I was driving on. It must have been about 10 meters ahead of me on the other side of the road. I was doing about 40 miles per hour, and I figured it would either wait, or even if it ran across the road, I would have passed it before it was in any danger. Just at that, the cat seemingly ran straight towards my car, and I'm 100% certain I heard a horrible thud of the poor thing going under my car, even over my loud music. This is when it gets weird. I stopped immediately. I adore animals, and I was also quite distraught, to say the least, at the prospect of running over a poor cat, and indeed someone's beloved pet. I was also quite shaken, as I was relatively new to driving. and I knew my mother was going to be furious if I damaged the car. I get out and notice there's no cat. I checked thoroughly as I was pretty sure I'd hit the wee cat. I started to reassess what had happened here, and I looked over to where the black cat had been sitting before this horror, and the same black cat was sitting exactly in the exact same place I'd seen it on my approach, completely unharmed, sitting like nothing had happened. I went over to the cat to see if maybe I had hit it and it was just stunned or something, but nope, the cat was perfectly fine and almost happy to meet me. I got back in the car and got on my way. It puzzles me to this day. I'm certain I hit that little thing. Thankfully, it was just some sort of glitch. My dad worked a lot when I was younger. He had taken a second job delivering computer parts on the weekends, and since we didn't see him much, he would let me ride shotgun once a week. This 2-hour trip with my dad was the absolute highlight of my weekend when I was 7. I woke up Saturday morning stoked, getting dressed to see him as quickly as possible. We had a tradition. As soon as we started the route, there was a little Easy Mart he would take me to. Every time I got a pack of pink extra gum and one of those little convenience store ice cream cones. So this particular day I tell my mum bye, and when I get to the threshold of my home, I am stricken with fear. I am starting to cry uncontrollably, begging my mum to not make me go. I distinctly remember being more terrified than anything. My mum's all like, "Whoa, okay, chill out, sister. Nobody's forcing you." She goes back into the kitchen and makes breakfast while I play with some Barbies. Roughly an hour later, the phone rings. My dad did this mail route in an old Bronco 2 and heard a noise in the back seat. When he turned and looked, he saw nothing. He looked back to the road and saw a mailbox. Overcorrecting, he rolled the Bronco 3 times and slid across the road before coming to a stop. He left the accident bumped and bruised, computer parts littering the highway. The passenger side, the one that I'd have been riding in, was completely crushed in. The only thing they found in the vehicle was a pink packaging of extra gum. I stayed at a friend's house about 3.5 months ago, and this is when it first started. We ate dinner and watched the Golden Girls before crashing out. I told her I was ready for bed and headed to the guest bedroom. She asked if I would leave the door open, because her cat likes to go in there, and if I don't, he'll scratch at the door. So I left the door open. I didn't mind though, because the living room light was on, and it comforted me, since I'd never slept there before. So I'm sleeping and get woken up by the cat jumping on the bed across my back. He doesn't actually land on me. I'm laying face down and don't think anything of it. But I felt something else move across my back, very similar to how the cat felt jumping over me, but it was going in the same direction of the cat. I hear the cat meow and hiss, and then I hear it, in a little girl's voice. "I want to get up there too." I tried to jump up, but I couldn't move. I was in complete panic, and couldn't move. Something pushed across my back again, and then the cat hisses and jumps after whatever was there. I have never been so scared in my life. I felt paralyzed, and not by fear, but by a pressure holding me down. I am not a religious person, but I started praying and getting a little emotional. I finally fell back asleep, as I had to be up around 6 a.m. to go to work the next day, and my alarm went off as planned. My friend, who was in the other room, yells and asks if I'm awake. I get up and go into her room and tell her good morning. She asked how I slept, and I told her not so great. She replies, "Me either. I kept having dreams about a demonic little girl in my room." This completely freaked me out. I told her what happened, and she was freaked. She grew up in that house and said she would never have anything like that happen. While I was getting ready for work, the cat that saved me would not leave my side. He literally laid on my feet while I did my makeup. I am not a fan of cats, but trust me, I was very welcomed that he didn't leave me. I have now had 2 more episodes when I hear her voice, and I wake up in a panic. I'm not sure if the last 2 were just nightmares, but it's scaring me and making me difficult to want to go to sleep, because I feel like she's following me. I was born legally blind, meaning I only have about 30% sight in one eye. I have also had second sight since birth, meaning I have been able to see spirits that have passed away. These were people I could not have known or met in my lifetime. I have done readings for everyone, from a random nurse at a hospital to a psychiatrist to my own family and friends. After the readings, I have made true believers out of many of them. One of the biggest disbelievers that I had was my own brother. This story is mainly about him. I have seen and spoken to my dead uncle ever since I was a very young child. I can't remember a time without him, but sadly my brother did not believe in this kind of thing. When I was 16, my brother had come to Virginia to visit my mother and I, because he lived with my grandmother. I had mentioned my uncle, and my brother had stated that he didn't want to believe that I was talking to David, even though my mother adamantly told him that there was no way I could have known what I knew about the accident and about his passing. My uncle got sick of not believing me, and told me, "Let's play a game with your brother." He told me to repeat exactly what he said to me. I took my brother to the side of the gathering and spoke to him quietly, with my mother listening to this odd conversation. He told me to tell my brother that he would break up with his girl, the one he was there with, and that he would get back together with someone that he already knew. My uncle said that she would already be pregnant by another man. This child will obviously not be his, though he would raise it as his own. I also told him that the baby's name would begin with a K. The second child would be his and be a boy. The final prediction was that the next pregnancy would be twins, a boy and a girl. I told him the girl would be born first and that the boy would have breathing issues but would be okay by the end of the night. My brother then laughed, went about his business, as I told him all of these predictions would obviously take some time to come true. When I was 16, I said all of this, and around the time that I turned 24, my brother was having his twins, and everything I'd said had come to pass. Each of my premonitions was fulfilled to the fullest extent. My brother had gotten back together with an old girlfriend from school. She was already pregnant by a married man, and then she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The second pregnancy was a boy, and it was his child. And third and fourth came the baby twins, like I said. The beautiful baby girl born first, followed by a handsome boy who had slight breathing issues, and my brother finally had to admit that he believed me. He proceeded to call me that night and asked me if his little boy would be okay. I said yes, and he would be off the machine before sundown, and he was. There was no way I could have predicted 4 children's births correctly, and years before they even thought of it. No matter what readers or listeners think, my uncle has been a huge part of my life ever since I was born. My mother would walk in my room at night, and I would be smiling and laughing in the dark for no reason, when she thought I would be terrified. At a very young age, I began to have out-of-body dreams, where a man would come and take me away to play games. I didn't know who he was, but I knew I was loved. One day in my grandmother's house, my mother was going through photos, and she saw one of my dead uncles. When I picked the photo up, it was like getting punched in the stomach. I whispered in my mother's ear urgently that this was the man I was seeing. She then told me that it was impossible because he died before I was born. This opened a huge new world for my mother. She now knew he was safe, that we do find each other, and that he loved her enough to stay and look out for her. This was a gift of great peace. He asked me many questions that I could not know the answer to, and when I replied with the correct answer, it really creeped her out. It took her a long time to get comfortable with this. Just the other night she was laying in bed and whispered that she loved him and missed him. From in the kitchen across the house, I hollered to her, "I don't know why, but he said he loves you and misses you too." Maybe because I was born with almost no vision, that I was granted the gift of second sight. This happened to my father. He joined the Navy somewhere around 80 to 84. He's told me many stories over the years, but one that sticks out in my mind was his first time at sea on a submarine. He'd recently got promoted and opted to become a submariner because of the exclusivity of the position. Less crew and usually only room for 1 to 2 people of your specific trade. Basically, you have to be the best to get on a sub. Anyway, his first night out at sea on a submarine, and everyone is asleep in their bunks. If you haven't seen them, they usually stack 2 to 3 high and line the sides of the hull in a long hallway type formation. Dad got stuck in one of the bunks at the very back. He wakes up around 2 AM to alarms and lights going off. Everyone rushing out of their bunks and out to the hatch into the next section of the submarine. Dad, being the last to wake up and the last out the bunks, ended up to the latch too late. It closed, sealed, and locked in front of him, with someone shouting on the other side, "Mike, find the leak." Apparently, a leak had sprung somewhere around the bunks. It either had to be fixed, or that section of the submarine would have to be sealed to prevent the water from spreading, leading him to drowning. Eventually he found it, sealed it, and the hatch was opened. He has a ton of stories, but this one is the one that scared him the most. This story also made me think of the Simpsons episode where this happened to Homer, except he sealed it with an earring. I was very, very young. I couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old, but this has always been one of the clearest memories I have. I was sleeping in my little race car bed, but I woke up in the middle of the night for some reason. I remember looking down at the foot of the bed and seeing an old lady in a white nightgown, just sitting on the edge of my bed, soothing the covers out and smiling at me. I remember calmly getting out of bed, walking to my parents' room and telling them, "There's a lady in a white nightgown sitting on my bed." I explicitly remember saying that exact sentence that night. The next morning, my dad got a call saying his grandmother, my great-grandmother, had passed away in the middle of the night. As I got older, I learnt more about her, such as the fact that I was her first great-grandchild and she absolutely adored me. She also wore white nightgowns throughout the last part of her life. I really don't believe in the paranormal, but I am confident that I will remember what is not a dream. I think she visited me the night she passed, and my little kid brain didn't know how to rationalize it and just rolled with it. I live on my own, and I am the only one who has a key to my apartment. 2 weeks ago I left my place to go on vacation. I have a small black plastic coffee maker that came with a small black plastic spoon for coffee beans. I had it for about 2 months before I went on vacation. I distinctly remember this spoon, and it was black, just like the coffee maker. When I returned home, I couldn't find my coffee spoon anywhere. I checked all over my kitchen and apartment for it. That's weird, but I figured I probably accidentally threw it away or something. This morning, I tried looking for the spoon again, and I found a different spoon in my sink. It's a small coffee spoon, but it's white, and it also has a missing shape to the other one I had. I have no other appliances, and I have no idea where the spoon came from, and I don't remember using this spoon for anything ever. It's kind of insignificant, but it's driving me nuts. Maybe it was a white spoon all along and my brain remembered wrong. Where did my original coffee spoon go? I think my grandma visited me shortly before she passed. She was in a hospice, so I left for Seattle for a week to be with my family and say my last goodbye. My last words to her were, "I love you." I think it was a few days after I returned that I was in my room and thought I saw some sort of misty blue thing from the corner of my eye. I looked up and it was gone. On the way back from work, I got a call from my dad and immediately knew what had happened. Dad and I had agreed that he wouldn't call me to tell me while I was at work, because this had been a rough loss for me, so that's how I knew. Since then, I've been absolutely certain that it was her visiting me to say bye. Dad told me once that he saw a ghost of my great-grandfather over my crib once when I was a baby. I guess that's just how our family do it. I'm still a pagan, but no longer Wiccan. When I was still practicing Wicca, I was holding an Ebscat, which is a full moon ritual. Basically, the full moon is supposed to be the time when our magical energy is at its highest. So different rituals like drawing down the moon or other spells might be done on these nights. I did Esbats on full and new moon. New moons, for me at least, were new beginnings and things like that. Anyway, I was also big into Hecate, and at the time had an altar to her by my bedroom door. We also had a pet dog. I read that dogs were sacred to Hecate, and I was pretty freaked out to see that, during the ritual, my dog cowered at any time she walked in front of the altar, but was fine when she was away from it. I tested this a few times, and when she cowered, every time I ended the ritual and took apart the altar. I'm into divination, mainly tarot, and have a few predictions that have come true. I've read for one of my friends, and she said that my readings were pretty accurate. One time I was messaging my dad, and we were talking about family history. Apparently some of the women in the family had reputations for seeing the future. I've never actually spoke to him about divination, but I told him that it must run in the family because I can too. I then told him about the time I had a dream where my best friend since childhood had a daughter, and that after having the dream, she told me she was pregnant, and a few months after that, we learnt she was having a girl. I also do oracle card readings from time to time. They're similar to tarot, but unlike tarot, they tend to have a phase on the card or a title, and you look it up in this book that comes with a deck to get a full message. A lot of times the decks, or their themes, are lighter and more fluffier than tarot, but my Halloween deck and my Oracle Light and Dark and Shadows deck are both nice and balanced. When I was having trouble with my mum's divorce, I did an oracle reading with my Halloween deck, and wound up getting a message that seemed like it was meant for her, so I passed it on. This was the second time I did an oracle card reading for myself, and got a message for someone else.